All right, we're live.
Mm-hmm.
We're live. Hello, Alexander. How are you?
I'm well, very well. A bit tired because obviously, again, with babies, you're kept up at night. But other than that, I'm fine.
All right. It's good to hear. Hello to everybody that is joining us on another live stream. We got a lot of topics to discuss. Well, maybe one big topic to discuss. And we'll jump right into that topic. First, let's say a big hello to everybody that is joining us on this live stream, everybody that is joining us on Locals as well, the Duran.locals.com. Hello to everyone on the chat that is running simultaneously on Locals. Hello to our awesome moderators. GEC is in the house. Alan Watson is in the house. Anyone else moderating? That's it. GEC 812 and Alan Watson. Thank you very much, guys, for moderating the chat. Hit that like as you enter the building. Alexander, let's just get into it because we have a lot of ground to cover. Hello to everyone, wherever you are in the world. We are going to focus on the anonymous sources that are saying the Russians will invade Ukraine. Just because I still can't figure out what's the reason. Maybe they want all that Ukrainian oil. I mean, no one understands the logic. And of course, wintertime is always the best time to invade a country. Everyone knows that as well.
Quite, yeah.
and these anonymous sources, they've gotten it right every other single time they've given us information. So why should anyone doubt the anonymous sources this time around? But tomorrow we have a telephone call between Putin and Biden, and I'm sure that Biden is going to really drop the hammer on Putin because, Scranton Joe has to show the American public that he is the man, that he can take on the evil Vladimir, and he has full control of his foreign policy. Alexander, what do you make of all of this that's going down? 100, what is it now? 175,000 troops went from 90 to 100. Now it's at 175,000 troops, and they're located right on the border, Alexander.
Absolutely.
Actually, 257 kilometers away from the border, but still, 257 kilometers is pretty much on the border.
You've got to be awed by Russian technology because they've already managed to deploy 175,000 invisible soldiers. You can't see them, but of course the anonymous sources tell us that they're there. So they must be there because, after all, the anonymous sources wouldn't lie about something like that, which must mean that the Russians have developed a technique for invisibility, because that's the only explanation for this. This business is becoming increasingly mad. It is getting madder by the hour. There was a really interesting article, really good article about this by Scott Ritter, who is, of course, a former US intelligence analyst. And he is saying, this thing is just beyond comprehension. Nothing about this story ultimately makes any sort of sense. There's clearly no Russian invasion planned. It's possible. I mean, there are some people who think that a Ukrainian attack on the Donbass is in the offing. The trouble with that is that apparently the Ukrainian army, and I'm not the only person who's saying this, I'm reading this from various sources, is in no condition at the moment to carry out such an attack. And of course, if it did, it would precipitate a war, and that doesn't seem to make any kind of sense either. The whole story is very, very weird. And the other thing is, consider how it started. You get an anonymously sourced article appearing in the Washington Post some time ago, telling us about how there was a Russian buildup around the border with Ukraine. Ukraine says they know absolutely nothing about that. They know no information about a Russian buildup. The Pentagon then says they got no information about a Russian buildup, no movements of troops which are unusual. And then the interesting thing is the State Department, and I'm pretty sure all this is pouring out of the State Department. I'm sure these anonymous sources are State Department people and perhaps some people from the intelligence community. They persist with all of this. They continue to run with all of this. And the sequels is that eventually, of course, everybody has to fall into line with all this hysteria. Everybody has to accept the story about these are not these invisible Russian soldiers, except according to Politico, some European governments who've been looking at the intelligence are completely skeptical and are asking what on earth is going on. I suspect those are the governments of Germany and France, by the way. And they're saying, where are these soldiers? What are you talking about? And apparently there's actually, for once, been some pushback from Europe about all of this. Now, I suspect the only thing that I can think of that makes any kind of sense here of this story is that someone in the State Department wants to use this story to leverage two things. Firstly, they want to green light more arms sales to Ukraine. Now, Biden has been extremely nervous about doing this, but I think this is partly what the agenda is. And I suspect that there are some other people within the State Department who are still itching for some means to close down Nord Stream 2 and perhaps to levy further sanctions, particularly disconnecting Russia from SWIFT. So they want to create some kind of hysteria around a non-existent issue to achieve those two things. And the whole topic has been driven by hysteria. But of course, what it's actually done in diplomatic terms is it's played into Putin's hands in one important respect, because it's now given him this opportunity to bring up the topic of the eastward expansion of NATO and to say that Ukraine joining NATO is a red line and that we now insist on a treaty, and he's going to talk about that with Biden. So this is something that the Russians have now seized on. They're now going to run with this, and that's what is apparently going to dominate the summit meeting between Putin and Biden tomorrow. But as I said, it's a very weird business. Somebody obviously is following an agenda. That's the only conceivable thing I can think of. As I said, an attempt to greenlight arms sales to Ukraine, and at the same time, perhaps another attempt to whip up support for further sanctions against Russia, because I can't believe that anybody in Washington seriously believes that an attack on Ukraine is coming. And I can't believe either that, given the state of the Ukrainian military at the moment, anybody in Washington seriously wants a Ukrainian offensive in eastern Ukraine, which looks likely it would fall apart. So that's what I think. That's the only explanation I can come up with.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. That's what I've been saying about this too. This is about getting more money for the military-industrial complex and trying to once again stop Nord Stream 2. Because at the end of the day, what is this all about? It's about a select group of people and institutions and companies, and the big guy. Maybe the big guy's involved in it. Definitely the big guy's son may be involved in it. But all of these people sitting around saying, why Nord Stream 2, guys? Why do you guys want to remove the focus from Ukraine all of a sudden? When things were so good in Ukraine, we were making tons and tons of money from IMF loans to Burismas to selling weapons. All these people, and in Ukraine and in Europe and in the United States, there's a select group of people that are saying, why do you want to change things with this damn Nord Stream 2 policy? Why? Or rapprochement with Russia? Why do you want to ruin such a beautiful money-making gravy train machine?
Well, that's right. And I think that's exactly what it is. And that's the agenda that's been followed. So, as I said, flesh creeping talk about a Russian invasion for which there is no evidence at all. Back in spring, when you remember, there was all that deployment of Russian forces, which countered deployment of Ukrainian forces. It made sense because at that time, there was a real Ukrainian deployment and there was a real Russian counter deployment. This time, nothing like that is happening, apparently on either side. So why suddenly whip it up like this at this particular point? I mean, I should stress, I've no doubt at all that the Russians have contingency plans. In fact, I mean, they do have contingency plans. I mean, we can say that for certain about what would happen if there was a Ukrainian attack on the Donbass. So the Russians have contingency plans. They've no doubt been making all the kind of preparations. In fact, again, one could say the fact they are making all the sort of preparations to prepare for a war in Ukraine if it comes. I mean, it's logical that they would. If you're going to set up red lines, you've got to take action to enforce those red lines. And these red lines are going to be enforced by military action, by, if you like, the mailed fist. So they're setting up the base areas, they're positioning troops in the base areas, they've got logistical, they're working out on the logistics, they're doing all those sort of things. But there is no evidence that any of those troops have been forward deployed to the borders. So this isn't preparatory for any kind of invasion or aggression or offensive action. So given that we have no military steps by either side that point to an imminent offensive, the only explanation has to be what you said. People are saying, why disrupt the lovely gravy train? We've been making lots of money. So let's keep it all alive by heating up the temperature and talking up a crisis in Ukraine. Hopefully that will stop Nord Stream 2, and hopefully that will get us more arms in Ukraine. And of course, we can create even more trouble for some of our competitors, our European competitors, by imposing further sanctions on Russia and maybe, disconnect from SWIFT and all that sort of thing, which would hurt, to be very clear, which would hurt European businesses, but not the kind of people we're talking about. So I suspect there's that kind of agenda being played out.
Yeah, Ray McGovern sent out a tweet where he says, false alarm, Russia planning massive 175,000 troop offensive v Ukraine. Post highlights scary unclassified satellite intel. Not to worry, here's the script. Biden will warn Putin at virtual meeting next week and thwart Putin war plan. I also think there's a little bit of making Biden look tough, especially after the bloody nose that he got with his Afghanistan debacle. So I'm sure a lot of the narrative will be, Biden really, put the hammer on Putin. He was tough. Scranton Joe once again stands up to the evil dictator.
Exactly. I mean, that's exactly. I mean, one can read all the script. I mean, he's going to be, JFK facing off against Khrushchev, and he's going to be the hero of the hour. Except nobody's going to believe this. This is the trouble. Because that's the other thing. Of course, I mean, if you're talking about Americans at the moment, people who are voting, I mean, they're not worried. They don't. This business about Eastern Ukraine barely registers, I suspect. What they're concerned about is the fact that food prices are rising, energy prices are rising, gas stations are the cost of petrol at the gas stations is surging upward. Those are the things that concern people. This business isn't going to really impress anybody, to be straightforward. And of course, the Europeans, I suspect, are totally cynical about all of this. But of course, in their interest, they will go beyond it. The Russians are actually, from their point of view, this actually, as I said, I come back to it, diplomatically, it plays into their hands because they've now been able to put the topic of the eastward expansion of NATO onto the agenda. They're going to say to Biden, look, if you want to solve the problem in Ukraine, if you want peace in Europe, then the way you've got to do it is by agreeing to what we want, which is a treaty on no further eastward expansion of NATO and a pullback of forces. Now, of course, Biden is going to say no, but that topic is now on the agenda. You can be sure that the Russians will bring it up at every opportunity.
Yeah, there's no doubt that any administration can't accept that type of deal from the Russians, nor can NATO, nor will the EU for that matter. So, I mean, okay, they're putting it on the table, and they can now put it on the table every time they meet, but it's never going to be accepted.
Well, I don't. So never is a very strong word. I'm going to say I think
short to medium term.
Exactly, short to medium term. I think this is a long-term play, a very long-term play. I think they're looking at the situation around the world. I think they're saying to themselves, events are moving in our favor. We've now got this topic on the table. Ukraine can't join NATO because that's our red line. Sooner or later, the Western powers will have to accept that red line in their own interests. in the interests of governments in Europe. And that means that at that point, they will probably want some kind of treaty or agreement or something which will crystallize it and which will provide real predictability in our relations. But you're absolutely right. That's not going to happen tomorrow when Biden meets Putin. It's not going to happen next year or in the next 5 years. Could happen, however, eventually. But at the moment, I don't think anybody in Moscow believes that's going to be what's going to be achieved in any short term.
Or the reverse may happen, which is that all of this craziness, all of this stupidity coming out of the State Department, coming out of the neocons and the Biden White House and the EU, because there are a lot of states in the EU and people in the EU that are pushing for this type of stuff, will actually lead to NATO saying, you know what, let's entertain the idea a little bit, in a little bit of more detail with Ukraine entering. Let's move some more forces, significant forces, and troops to Ukraine, and they're gonna bungle it, and then Russia will have to.
Well, exactly.
I mean, that is the danger. There is that this is kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way where eventually Russia will have to invade. And in that situation, because we're saying, just real quick, Alexander, we're saying that Russia is not going to invade now. This is just stupidity. But if NATO does move forces, significant troops into Ukraine, if the U.S. Moves significant troops into Ukraine or weapons into Ukraine, if NATO really does entertain the idea of Ukraine entering the alliance, then Russia has a green light to say, you know what, that's it. We're moving in.
Absolutely, I know that is exactly correct. And can I just say, I mean, there are some people in Europe. There's an interview in the German daily Handelsblatt by Wolfgang Ischinger. He's not somebody I suspect most people have heard of, but he's actually quite an influential policy person in Germany. He heads the Munich Security Conference. He chairs the Munich Security Conference. And he's just made a statement saying that the Russian red lines are real. If we cross them, we will have a confrontation in Europe. And that is something we've got to be incredibly careful about. And we mustn't let ourselves get drawn into this. And it isn't just Ischinger. There will be other people who will be saying that too. But you will also get the neocons who will want to test the red lines. They either have convinced themselves that those red lines are a bluff, and they want to call the bluff because they think they can humiliate Putin and destabilize Russia by doing that. And that's the kind of thing these sort of people would want to do. People like Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, he's a good example of that kind of thinking. Or alternatively, they do want an actual confrontation and a war with Russia of some sort, a controlled war with Russia, as they see it in Eastern Europe, because from their point of view, that advances what they think is their agenda. Actually, it doesn't do that at all. It would be a debacle, but it's the sort of thing that I can imagine some of them wanting and indeed aching for. I mean, these people never see a war that they walk away from. So you're going to start getting more divisions, I think, in Europe over the next few years, not just between people like Ischinger, the sort of people who have some grounding in reality, and the neocons, but within the neocon group as well, those who think it's a bluff but don't really want a war, and those neocons who actually want a war, because that's what neocons want always.
Yeah, well, they may also want the destruction of Europe. I mean, it won't be the first time that these crazies think that a big war on the continent is a way for them to retain power or to enrich themselves, or to bring forth once again a new world order, like they always do. Start a war in Europe, and then you can have a new world order convene after a certain amount of years, and there you have it. So, I mean,
after all, that's what
and it would destroy Europe.
Absolutely. That essentially is what happened in the Second World War. The Second World War destroyed Europe. I mean, it's never been the central force, civilizational, economic, political force that it was before the Second World War. And the result of that destruction of Europe was, of course, the global preeminence of the United States and a restructuring of the international system. And it's entirely possible that some neocons, in their own crazy way, think that if you do the same thing all over again, you have a war in Europe, which leads to the destruction of Europe, well, something will happen, and it won't be the United States exactly, but the kind of system that they want, that will prevail, and that will mean that they can rearrange everything around that vision that they have. I mean, it's mad thinking, but I have to say straight away, I read lots of neocon pieces, and these people are barely sane. Some of them, some of the things I read are just so way out and bizarre that, I mean, I do really wonder at the connection these people have to reality.
What happens if they get Russia off the SWIFT?
Well, the Russians have their own interbank payment system now set up that will go into operation, and of course they've also got their own card system, and that will go into operation. Now there'll be some period of adjustment. I mean, you can't just cut off things from SWIFT. It won't be seamless. There'll probably be a couple of months of disruption, but eventually it will all be sorted out. The big losers will be European businesses, because European businesses, those that have invested in Russia, particularly the sort of middle rank, Mittelstand companies in Germany, and many of them have invested in Russia. If Russia's disconnected from SWIFT, they can't take their money out as they once could. So that's going to be a real problem. Looking longer term, those sort of problems might be sorted because you could have, digital currencies, and they don't need SWIFT, but we're not there yet. And of course, the southern European economies will be devastated. Cyprus will lose its Russian tourists. Turkey has already got the Mir card, so they accept the Mir card, so they're to some extent protected from this. But Cyprus, Greece, parts of Italy, parts of Spain, they will be devastated because the Russian tourist trade is an increasingly important part of their economies, and that will all go.
Yeah, the key to this is that it would damage SWIFT and
Yeah.
Europe more than I think it would damage Russia
Absolutely.
in the medium to long term.
Absolutely.
I mean, SWIFT would be rendered useless, and it will open the doors to push more for a central bank digital currency.
Absolutely, it's exactly.
That may be reason enough for them to figure out a way to put sanctions on Russia, get them out of SWIFT, weaken SWIFT, or start chipping away at SWIFT, so that eventually you can usher in the central bank digital currency, which is a key plank of their Build Back Better agenda.
Absolutely. Bear in mind, of course, that Russia, China, Iran, Japan all have alternatives to SWIFT that are operating. Russian, Chinese, Iranian systems are apparently there's already work on integrating them. So you already have a big alternative to SWIFT potentially on the horizon. A major alternative to SWIFT on the horizon. But beyond that, of course, digital currencies, and we're not talking about cryptocurrencies here. We're talking about digital currencies controlled by central banks. They are just over the horizon. All the big countries, all the big central banks are working on them. And of course, that ultimately, they will make SWIFT redundant because you can transfer money electronically in a completely different way. And if you want to move towards a world of digital currencies directly controlled by central banks, well, of course, doing away with SWIFT is actually could advance your agenda in that way.
Yeah. What else do you think they're going to talk about tomorrow, or agree on tomorrow, if they agree on anything?
No, they're not going to agree on anything. One can't be. We won't be flies on the wall. But I suspect that 99% of this discussion is going to be on Ukraine and on eastward expansion of NATO. But they will talk about other things. Iran is a big issue. We're now clearly moving to a situation where the talks between Iran and the United States to revive the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, that they're on the brink of collapse. And Iran is now enriching uranium up to a level of 60%, and that's very close, apparently, to getting it to weapons grade. The US claims that it had been looking to Russia and China to put pressure on Iran. That pressure obviously isn't coming in the way that it was, because the Russians and indeed the Chinese have far less incentive now to help with this negotiation than they did before. So they will talk about Iran because this is a difficult issue. I'm not quite sure what Biden himself wants over Iran. Maybe he's worried that they will get a nuclear weapon before long. Maybe he's not. Maybe he wants another crisis there. But anyway, I'm sure they will talk about Iran, and they will see what the Russians can do. They could talk about migrant flows. I mean, it's not impossible that they will talk about migrant flows because, again, the United States claims to be worried about this thing. I don't know to what extent they really are, but perhaps the Europeans will have asked the Americans to bring this topic up. Remember, we're going to see large numbers of people from Afghanistan heading westward in the summer. That looks now a certainty. And there'll be the usual things that people talk about: arms control, cybersecurity, those sort of things. But from what I can understand, all those talks are basically dead in the water.
Yeah. I'm sure that Biden is very concerned about migrant flows into Europe.
Well,
he's definitely not concerned about migrant flows at the southern border. That's for sure. Maybe he can put the border czar in charge of the migrant flows for Europe.
What a brilliant idea. I mean, we can get her know-how. She can come to Brussels and advise her good friend Ursula von der Leyen. After all, these two great minds working on this project would be certain to come to a solution. But if that topic is discussed, it will be dealt with in a very cursory way. As I said, I mean, I don't really think there will be anything else. I think this is going to be a topic, a discussion, basically about Ukraine and NATO's eastward expansion. There is the other thing, which is now becoming increasingly difficult, which is this impasse over the diplomats. The US really wants to try to get its embassy. Apparently, this is true because, I mean, the collapse of the US embassy in Moscow, which is an ongoing story. I mean, it's shrinking almost with every iteration. It's getting worse and worse. Means that the US intelligence operation, I'm talking about human intelligence operation, working with spies and agents and that sort of thing, in Moscow, in Russia, has all but collapsed. So they're not getting the information on the ground that they once did. So I think they're really worried about that. So they want to find some solution to that. But at the same time, they're not prepared to do what the Russians say, which is return the embassy property that they seized back in 2016 and lift the restrictions on the Russian diplomats. So this problem is getting worse, spiraling down. The State Department's response has been to expel ever more Russian diplomats. The Russians retaliate by expelling more. And of course, we're in a downward spiral, and there doesn't seem to be any way out of it. I think that Biden will want to bring that up, but we'll see what Putin says. At the moment, the Russians don't seem to be in any mood to compromise over it. There was a very weird story in the Washington Post, which actually said that an agreement had been reached, and it's been reported as saying that an agreement had been reached. The same anonymous sources, I suspect, that are telling us that there's a Russian offensive against Ukraine. Within hours of that story appearing on the Washington Post, the Russians contradicted it. They said that there's not only not been an agreement, there are no substantive discussions even underway.
An agreement for the NATO?
No, an agreement over diplomatic representation.
Oh, over the representations.
Representation.
Why would Russia say,
exactly.
okay, yeah, just bring in more, bring the spies back. Bring them back to our country.
Exactly.
And vice versa.
Exactly. So we are in that. So that we're in that Mexican standoff, as I said, the US wants to reopen, get its embassy going. There's a famous joke, which isn't a joke at all, that the one way to protect yourself from a regime change operation, if you're a government, is to close the US embassy. So, we're actually heading steadily towards that position
And
in
the
Russia.
NGOs.
And the NGOs remember, the NGOs are linked. They work with the embassy. It's a whole sort of structure. So the NGOs are being gradually squeezed out in Russia because of this new Foreign Agents Act, and as I said, the embassy is being gradually squeezed to death also. So they want to find a way of reopening it, but they don't want to make any substantive concessions. So they spread a story 2 days ago in the Washington Post that the Russians had agreed to something about some measures to reopen the embassy. And within hours, the Russians said this simply wasn't true. So it's an odd story. I don't know quite where that's going to go, but at the moment, the Russians are implacable about it.
Yeah, I think that all of Europe, going back to the migrant issue, I think all of Europe is being softened up for the understanding that come springtime, there's going to be a massive migrant inflow into Europe. I know that just this past couple of days, the Pope was in Greece, and he was softening up Greece for the prospects of millions of refugees and migrants coming over. I mean, that's what I understood was the purpose. His trip to
I entirely agree.
Yeah, he's softening it up. And by the way, and the Ukraine defense minister came out with a statement the other day, and he said that if there's a Russian invasion, then you can expect 5 million Ukrainians to flood into Europe as well. So all the rhetoric is there. Europe, you're going to have millions of migrants coming in.
Absolutely, that is absolutely correct. And on my last live on locals, this topic of the Pope's visit to Greece came up, and there was a lot of talk that this was all about, and which I had no reason to challenge that it was all about talking, establishing dialogue with the Greek Orthodox Church. I think it's increasingly looking as if this visit is more for the purpose that you've just identified, not really about dialogue with the Orthodox Church, which this particular Pope hasn't shown much interest.
Dialogue for what?
What dialogue for what? Exactly.
That doesn't make any sense.
Exactly. I mean, he's visiting refugee camps. He's doing all these things. He's not really concerned about the sort of theological finer points of theology with the Greek Orthodox Church. So I think that's what this is really about, and I agree with you.
It makes me wonder we're in the winter time. We're heading into Christmas and the New Year, and we're starting to hear all the talks about big migrant flows. We're seeing the signals of big migrant flows coming into Europe come spring. So we have Afghanistan, Ukraine. For now, in the winter, nothing's going to happen, but something could happen, a tripwire. And I'm just trying to think what else could be the spark that ignites a huge migrant flow. Turkey, big meltdown in Turkey. Lots of protests in Turkey. Erdogan is in big poo-poo. I mean, he is in big trouble. People are pissed off because inflation there is hitting something like 20% plus. I mean, you can't buy anything anymore in Turkey. The next day, it's just going up all the time. And Erdogan, he doesn't have a handle on any of this. So Turkey could also be a part of this whole migrant puzzle coming into Europe. What do you think is going on there?
Absolutely. I mean, can I just say, you're now increasingly starting to read, and not just in the sort of big financial media, Bloomberg, Financial Times, WSJ, but even in places which have up to now been reasonably sympathetic to Erdogan, talk about Turkey being on the brink of hyperinflation. That we are actually looking at a hyperinflation crisis that's gradually brewing there. Because if that happens, then you're absolutely right. I mean, Erdogan's political position looks increasingly unstable in Turkey itself. You can have a political crisis in Turkey, breakdown in the economy. Bear in mind, Erdogan relies to a great extent on the loyalty of the police. I mean, they're people who handle his protests. If there's a if there's a hyperinflation crisis, how do you pay the police? What do you pay them with? So, I mean, that's always the problem with these kind of scenarios. So, crisis in Turkey is entirely possible. If that happens, then, of course, Turkey is the great gateway for migrant flows. I'm afraid the obvious destination for them is Greece. They'll be getting on their boats across the Aegean. In the spring and summer, was the waters, the Mediterranean starts to sort of become still, it begins to become a lot more attractive, and we could see a vast armada of them over the next few months. Famine in Afghanistan, crisis in Turkey, financial crisis in Turkey. I mean, it just you can already see how this is going to go.
Not many people talk about Ukraine when they're talking about this Russia invasion of Ukraine and all of this this narrative, but Ukraine is also in a meltdown period. Maybe
Absolutely.
it's a slower meltdown, but I would say from Maidan to today, I mean, every day it's just getting a little bit worse and a little bit
Yeah.
worse. I think it's reached the point where
Yeah.
it won't take much to
No.
break down Ukraine at this point in time.
I agree. I think we're getting closer, ever closer to a tipping point. And I think Ukrainians know it. And I think part of the reason, by the way, for all this hysteria over the last few days about Russian invasions is because some of Ukraine's backers in Washington and Brussels and Berlin are also starting to get nervous about the internal situation in Ukraine. And remember, Zelensky a few days ago was talking about a coup in Ukraine. I mean, he was actually saying that a coup was being prepared against him and would be launched by a powerful Ukrainian oligarch, Rinat Akhmetov. Now, I mean, that didn't make sense in the way it was described, but it is a case that a whole group of Ukrainian oligarchs, including Akhmetov and including the former Ukrainian Interior Minister, Arsen Avakov, are apparently all mysteriously traveling to Vilnius, to Lithuania, for some kind of secret meeting, or at least, well, they're not saying that they're going in a meeting, they're just saying they're all going to Lithuania simultaneously by coincidence. I mean, who knows? But I mean, there is increasing talk that Zelensky's own position is becoming increasingly precarious and that he's tottering. Now, of course, if he's forced to resign or there's protests against him and he's overthrown, given how fragile the situation is in Ukraine it's very easy to see how the whole situation in Ukraine could unravel as well. I mean, the oligarchs and those particular forces have engineered the ouster of various Ukrainian presidents and governments before. They did it with Yanukovych in 2014. They did it with Yanukovych again when he was prime minister in 2007. They did it before that with the Orange Revolution in 2004, I think, if my memory serves me rightly. But at that time, when all those events happened, Ukraine was in much better shape than it is today. I mean, it was already on a downward trajectory, but it wasn't as bad as it is now. They may think they can do the same again. They may think they can shuffle out Zelensky and put somebody rather more effective in charge. But the risk they run is that if they start doing those things with the political process, maneuvering people out and putting other people in, what they could see is the whole thing collapse, the whole house of cards fall down. Can I just say, for those of our viewers who aren't aware, and this is anticipating forward of programs that we're going to get to in the future, but we've been doing a series of historical programs about the situation in Russia in the lead up to the revolution. But in effect, that was what was happening, because in Russia, just before the revolution, there was actually coup attempts to talk about coups against the Tsar. And there was, a whole group of people were moving pieces already to try and prepare for a moment when he would be shunted aside and somebody else would take over, somebody that they could control. And what they actually did was they demoralized the military and the security forces in Russia. And in a period of already deepening crisis, what actually happened was that all those maneuvers set the scene for the final collapse of the whole system. And Ukraine, it could be the same.
Yeah, and that's going to have a domino effect across Europe.
Oh, one day, yeah.
That's for sure. Let's do some.
Well, can I just say? I mean, if we do have a crisis like that in Ukraine, if there is a complete breakdown, then the Ukrainian defense minister's predictions of millions of people from Ukraine moving westward is not impossible.
You already have millions of Ukrainians that have fled the country. Yeah,
Well, of course you do. Well, of course you do. And the thing is, we don't know how many. Yeah. Ukraine itself doesn't do a census. It hasn't done a census since it gained independence of the Soviet Union. We don't actually know how many people live in Ukraine at the moment. What we do know is an awful lot of people have left, and it's likely that more will do.
Yeah, no one reports the fact that millions of people left Ukraine after the Maidan, and they went to Poland and they went to Russia.
To Russia, exactly.
Actually, I think Russia was the #1 spot where,
absolutely,
where Ukrainians migrated to after the Maidan.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, they had a huge loss of population.
Yes. And of course, it's the young, the able, the people who are able to work, who are able to set up businesses, who pay the taxes. It's they who are leaving.
Yeah. Let's do some. Let's take some questions, Alexander. Some super chats from Yinka 1799. Super chat. Thank you very much, Yinka. And Yinka also says it's a house of cards.
Yeah, I
guess referring to Ukraine.
Yeah,
it is a house of cards, and
it is a house of cards.
It's gonna crumble soon.
Yes.
Let's see. Neat Switch says, "What will Russia do if ballistic rocket defense, similar to Poland's, is deployed by NATO in Lithuania, Estonia, or Latvia?"
Well, the Russians have said about Ukraine, if they were deployed in Ukraine, that would be a red line. And if they were deployed in Ukraine, then they would act immediately. So they said that's an absolute explicit statement. If they are deployed in the Baltic states, or there is talk of deploying them in the Baltic states, if you think about it from a military point of view, it makes no real logic to say that it's a red line in Ukraine, but not a red line in the Baltic states. Now, I think that before anything like that happened, and it takes a long time for these things to actually happen. You can announce it, but there's a long time before it does. I think you would start to see a massive rise of tension in the Baltics. And what the Russians would do, I'm not going to try and predict, but they would react. At the very least of what they would do, for example, is move nuclear weapons into Belarus, which is something that Lukashenko has already basically admitted is a topic under discussion. But I suspect they would probably take even stronger action than that.
Yeah, I wonder if the Baltic states even want that.
I don't think.
I mean, they like to talk a big game.
No, yeah.
They talk a big game against Russia, but I think they understand that it wouldn't benefit them to move those types of missiles into their country.
That is exactly wrong. That is exactly correct. The thing about the Baltic states, people don't really understand, is that they are, of course, economically dependent on Russia. It's diminishing, not so much because the Baltic states wanted to diminish, but because Russia does. So Russia has, for example, moved away a lot of its freight, its cargo, from Baltic ports to places like Kaliningrad and to new ports that the Russians are building closer to St. Petersburg. But the Baltic states they're connected to Russia economically. So as Alex absolutely rightly says, they talk a very big game, but in practice, when it comes down to it, they are very, very conscious that there is a limit to what they can do. They can poke the dragon in the eye, like Lithuania just did, by opening a Taiwan representation office. But when it comes to Russia, they have to be a lot more careful. I mean, to give one example, Russia can cut off their gas. They're in a very difficult hole.
Yeah. Let's see. David sends $4.99 super chat. Thank you very much, David. Rifi says, do call-ins, make call-ins great again. We'll look to get that.
We will do it.
up
We will get
again
it
in the new year.
we will. I mean, I would point out that, as I say, call-ins are, they take a lot of hard work, and of course, at the moment, because I'm got two newborn children, it's somewhat demanding to do. But we are definitely going to get back to doing call-ins once all these logistical issues
once the dust settles.
Dust settles.
From Rit, Japan has many indigenous systems already for work for 30 years. They have QZSS, the indigenous Japanese GPS, monetary technologies. Japan is future ready.
Absolutely. Japan has many problems. I mean, it's another country which has a difficult demographic situation. For example, the government in Japan is very heavily underwater in debt with debt. Though Japan has large savings, so it's not as big a problem as it might be for other countries. And of course, Japan's industrial sector grew incredibly fast until the 80s. But it's basically stopped growing, though at a very, very high level. Japan, if we wanted to, could be a major international player. And if the US were to start pulling back from the Pacific, or there was some kind of a crisis there, you can imagine Japan starting to play an active role on its own once more. And, it has all the mechanics and all the means to be, if not a great power, a very significant power again.
Yeah. Nitswitch says, thanks for the comprehensive answer with regard to the Baltic question. You're very welcome. Thank you for that super chat. And Aussie MailTuber says, Alex and Alexander, of all the magnificent media bringing us magnificent news coverage and detailed analysis, despite escalating censorship, yours is and has been most valuable to me. And you shine brightly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Can we also just say, I mean, you can find us on Locals, and some of the problems you just mentioned really don't apply there.
Yeah. And we're on Rumble and BitChute, Super U, Odyssey, absolutely. And Aussie MailTuber also says here in another super chat, Australian quarantine camps are taking over from home quarantine for close contacts. Our weekly mass protest continues to increase in size. I still think they will reach critical mass.
Interesting.
The camps are a big. I mean, it's out. We've crossed the Rubicon. If you ask me. I mean,
I agree.
It's terrible. And the people who are running Australia now are absolutely destroying Australia's name and brand and everything about Australia from the outside looking in. I mean, they're destroying the country.
I completely agree. Yeah. And I mean, to be honest, I mean, I've even found commentaries in America, in mainstream American media. One of them was entitled "A Country That Is Going Mad."
How do you fix tourism? We get over all of this.
Yeah.
Let's just say, hypothetically, we get over all of this. How do you rebuild the tourist industry after all of this damage that they've done?
I can't see how it can be done, actually. I can't see how it can be done. I wonder whether tourism will ever revive in the same way that it existed before. Anyway.
It's madness. Anyway, thank you very much for that. That super chat. David says here, Biden history with money and regime change. Is the world better off with Ukraine aligned with Russia or controlled by neocons?
I presume that's a rhetorical question, because I mean, I'm sure you know what our answer will be. And I think it's an answer established by history. To be straightforward about this, let's assume that that the US accepted Russia's red lines and did agree to what Putin proposes, a treaty giving Russia secure legal guarantees for its western border. Tension across Europe would fall. There'd be a dramatic fall in tension. The Russians wouldn't feel threatened. There wouldn't be any reason for all this enormous amount of international tension. It's because the neocon drive has been pushing NATO eastward and seeking confrontation with Russia all the time that we have this enormous tension in Europe and indeed in the world. Take that away, absent that, and the problem disappears.
Let's see. Pamina Benson, 2000 DKK super chat. Wish you all a Merry Christmas. Thank you very much.
Thank
for
you
this
very much.
Incredible super chats, Pamina.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, and a Merry Christmas to you and to everyone on this stream. Hope everyone has a really good holiday season.
Yeah.
Enjoy the holidays, even though they're trying to take it away from us.
Indeed. That's right.
Thank you very much for that generous, amazing super chat, Pamina. Flying Boar, Putin arrived in India. What you expect from that?
Isn't that interesting? Because, of course, on the one hand, the US talks about wanting to isolate Russia. And on the other hand, the Russians now have, of course, a de facto alliance with China. And at the same time, they are able to maintain this extremely friendly and close relationship with India, which, it's a sign of the skill of their diplomacy on the one hand. But Putin has been very well received in India, one of the first countries he's visited, by the way, since the pandemic. And there's already been a major deal done on defense cooperation and all other kinds of things. There's talk about Russia building a gas pipeline to India. All kinds of trade agreements, those sort of agreements are in the pipeline, if you forgive the use of that particular metaphor. And it's a sign that Russia is not isolated. I mean, that is a Western fantasy. They've got very, very close relations with India. And in fact, the relationship with India is one which the Russians give great priority to and which India gives great priority to. So more defense contracts, pipeline contracts, more technology cooperation, all kinds of things.
Yeah.
Oh, I just would add, just on that topic, that the Russians also brokered and chaired a meeting of the Chinese, Russian, and Indian foreign ministers about a week ago, and they were all able to bring these two sides together and had a very civil discussion. And in fact, they even issued a joint statement which showed, commonality on many international issues as well. So, Russians have taken India very seriously, and they're able to achieve things there.
Okay. Kurt says, could the Duran have more live streams, e.g. Friday, Saturday, and Sundays? We can't get enough.
Well, there are two of us. I mean, there's only so many hours in the day, but certainly we love doing our live. I mean, speaking for myself, it's my favorite thing. I mean, I love doing live streams more than anything else that we do on the Duran, and perhaps in time we will get to doing more. So let's work to that.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much for that. Raphael says, for the first time in my life, top level generals are going on TV to tell the U.S. not going to go this way. I saw a general telling that we are going to lose.
Yeah, I agree. The retiring chief of the British general, of the British staff, Sir Nick Carter, who has been, pretty conventional in his statements. He's now warning that, we're at real danger of an accidental war with Russia, as he puts it. He clearly isn't happy about the situation. Obviously, he's just retiring, and like a lot of British soldiers, he's only able to say what he really thinks when he retires, because he's not bound by the policies of the defense, of the Department of Defense. But I agree, we're seeing increasing numbers of people in the military who are becoming increasingly worried about the direction of travel. That isn't all. I mean, it has to be said, there are a lot of other military people who have a very, very strong neocon views, who would like to look at confrontation in every opportunity. There's been a whole leak of information about the former NATO military commander, General Breedlove, for example, which was, absolutely zany stuff. I mean, it really was, General Turgidson of Apocalypse Now, sort of. Not Apocalypse Now, the Stanley Kubrick film, Doctor Strangelove stuff.
Dr. Strangelove.
And I mean, it was on that sort of level. I mean, it was crazy stuff. And so you have those generals but you also have other generals who understand things and understand how dangerous the situation is becoming, and they're starting to give warnings.
Yeah. Command unit says the Ukrainian situation does look hopeless, but will they really try a Saakashvili maneuver? They could be just increasing tensions to get foreign aid.
Well, I think there's some element of truth. I'm sure that's true. I mean, the Ukrainians are out and about, and they're talking almost incessantly about the fact that they need help. They clearly want arms. It'll be interesting to see what kind of arms they get, by the way. And the defense minister of Ukraine is now talking about the need to send US and Canadian and British advisors. Interesting, it's those countries to the border, the Russian border. The Russians have already said that if that happens, they won't accept those NATO troops there as any form of tripwire. So I think that's true. I think that the Ukrainians are milking this thing for all that they can get. They want financial help, they want weapons help, they want everything you can imagine. The trouble is, I don't see how that really solves their underlying problems. Their problems are internal. They're not really connected to Russia. And what all this language that coming out of Ukraine makes me feel is that they're actually becoming increasingly desperate.
Yeah, they don't care about fixing the internal problems. What they're looking at is to keep the grift going.
Absolutely.
That's it. They're saying, look, just get us money.
Yeah.
Keep the grift going. Keep giving us the money that you guys were giving us before. Why are you changing everything around? That's exactly what they're saying. Yeah. I understand their point of view if you put yourself in their shoes. The Hunter Bidens and all these types of people that, were operating in Ukraine, and all these IMF officials and the Lagardes and all these guys, they're probably saying, why are we ruining such a good thing, such easy money?
Yeah. By the way,
that's what they're saying.
Speaking on all of that, by the way, just to say that the Supreme Court in Britain is now hearing the case about Ukraine's default on its $3 billion loan from Russia. This is a $3 billion loan that the former Ukrainian president, Viktor Yanukovych, obtained from Russia shortly before the Maidan events, which caused his overthrow. And the existing government has refused to pay that loan back. And the Russians sued in the British courts. And this has been an unbelievably protracted case. And we'll see what happens. If the Supreme Court sides with Russia, and most legal analysts think it will, then Ukraine is in default. And it's in default to a country, which is Russia, which is a member of the Paris Club. And at that point, theoretically, the IMF has to stop lending. Now, I don't for one microsecond believe that, but I mean, you could see it'll be interesting to see what kind of arguments they come around. My guess is that despite the legal arguments being overwhelmingly on Russia's side on this, the Supreme Court will find some way of siding with Ukraine and knocking it back to the lower court, and we'll have another 5 years of litigation there. The British won't want a decision one way or the other.
Yeah. Rocky Luck says, how much does Biden's corruption in Ukraine play on the need for a war in Ukraine to whitewash it?
I suspect quite a lot. It's difficult to know the whole story there because the media just doesn't want to look into that. And we don't really have enough information. Go on, Alex.
No, I was going to just present to you a different scenario of how Biden may be looking at it, the Biden family may be looking at it, and that they're too high profile now to continue with the corruption in Ukraine. In other words, we're not going to rescue Ukraine now. We're not going to help Ukraine because, back when Biden was vice president or was out of office, then, Hunter could sit at the board of these companies. There was no political capital or any repercussions there. But now they just can't risk it.
Well, a former journalist who worked at the New York Times and who knows this situation, who knows Biden, actually made exactly that same point to me, that Biden would not actually want to be too closely involved with Ukraine, precisely because of the miasma of problems he personally and his family have around it. I should say that, I mean, these problems are going to get worse, and not just about Ukraine. I mean, we have to be so careful. I'm afraid, again, this is one of those topics I really don't know where the boundaries are anymore. But I mean, some of the things that the Sun's been up to, and some of the films that are appearing, especially in the British media, are just, well, they're astonishing. And I wonder how much longer this story can be kept
Just
under control.
just going on that thread, Alexander, isn't
Yeah.
it so dumb that the Biden team is allowing the conversation to continue around Ukraine? I would have thought that the minute
Yeah.
Biden got into office,
Yeah.
one of the first orders that I would have done if I was on Biden's PR communications team is, you know what? I don't ever want to hear any news story or any media about Ukraine ever again.
Yeah.
Like ever again. I
Yeah.
just don't care. We don't care about it. We're done with it.
Yeah.
Don't report on it. I would call up CNN, MSNBC, Washington Post.
Yeah.
I would just put a complete, blackout on Ukraine because of his past history. But instead, they keep on beating this horse, and it doesn't do Biden any good, because when you think of Ukraine, what I think of is Hunter, Burisma, 10% for the big guy. I mean, all of that just comes back up again.
Absolutely. The trouble is, he might want to give an order like that, but is he able to? If he gives an order like that, will anybody pay any attention? The problem with Ukraine is, I don't think he's able to control the narrative on Ukraine, because the neocons, to be absolutely clear, people like Victoria Nuland, people like Hillary Clinton, are fixated with it. I mean, it is an obsession that they are running with, and I think that if an instruction like that it couldn't be an order, but some kind of instruction like that were to come from Biden or from his team, I think those sort of people, the neocons and the rest, and remember, they're all over the media, they're in the think tank community, they're on the Atlantic Council, they're in all those sort of places. I think they just ignore it, and I think that's the trouble. I mean, for all I know, that's exactly what he wants, but I mean, he's not able to make that kind of decision stick.
Yeah. Let's see. Leafy Bug from Local says, I have a question about the assertion that Western leaders gave verbal assurances to Soviet leaders that NATO would not expand eastward. I do not understand why Russia continues to cite these verbal agreements as if they ought to carry some sort of global diplomatic weight. It seems absurd to me that such a massive geopolitical bargain would be struck verbally, no treaty, nothing. It should be regarded as null, and Russia should unilaterally impose its red lines.
Well, can I just say something? Of course, you are absolutely right. I mean, Gorbachev was completely wrong not to insist on some sort of treaty, on some treaty or something of that kind. But the reason the Russians harp on this is because, of course, those promises were indeed made. And it does give the Russians traction over this argument. They could come back and they could say, we were given all of these promises, you broke your promises, so now we insist on a treaty because we can't rely on your promises anymore. And of course, when the Western powers won't agree to that, well, the Russians have already said that they have red lines, and the red lines, the nature of red lines is that Russia will fight to defend them. And as somebody very rightly said, I thought it was one of the most perceptive comments. I even actually have been Leafy Bug, actually, who made it on one of the locals live streams that I've done, is that what is at the moment started as a red line from Russia will in time become a demand and then an ultimatum. And you can see how we are slowly moving in that direction. So you start with the original breach of promise. It was only a verbal promise, didn't have any treaty point, but it does give you the moral advantage. You then move on, declare your red lines, and the Russians have already done that. They've already said they will go to war if those red lines are broken, which, by the way, effectively means, let's just to mention this, since the Russians have made this a red line and they said that they would be prepared to go to war, the possibility of Ukraine now joining NATO no longer exists, because nobody's going to go to war in order to get Ukraine into NATO. At least that's so. I mean, that issue in practical terms is dead. So they've set their headlines. They then go up. Now they're asking for a treaty. Of course, they won't get a treaty. But further along the line, they will make a demand, and when the demand isn't fulfilled, it will become a demand backed by a warning, in effect, an ultimatum. It's a very long process. We said at the beginning of this program, won't happen tomorrow when Biden and Putin meet. It won't happen in a year's time. It won't happen in 5 years' time. It will happen, I think, eventually. It'll take a very long time to get there, and there'll be a lot of bumps along the road before we do.
Yeah, Ukraine would be best served if they would just understand that the United States doesn't care about Ukraine at all. They're focused on how do they damage Russia, and they're using Ukraine in order to figure out ways to damage Russia. They don't care about Ukraine. The only reason that some American prominent families, we'll say that, prominent families, ex-vice presidents' sons, and other people and institutions are interested in Ukraine is because they can steal a lot of money from Ukraine. And as far as Europe goes, Europe and NATO, they want nothing to do with Ukraine either. They don't want Ukraine in NATO because there's very few countries in NATO that will decide to go to war with Russia in order to save Ukraine. And the European Union cannot take in Ukraine into the EU. It is an impossibility. They can't do it. They simply cannot handle a country the size of Ukraine's and the state of Ukraine in the EU. It is impossible. The EU is already crumbling. You put Ukraine into the European Union, it'll be busting like a day. So maybe they should take in Ukraine. Maybe that would be the best way to be done with the European Union. So the minute Ukraine realizes that all of this that started in 2014 was a complete lie and a farce, the better off they will be, so they can start forming alliances and start forming understandings with their neighbors and fix the problems that are plaguing their country and abide by the Minsk agreement and abide by the freaking Minsk agreement. That's all they have to do.
Alex, you summed it up perfectly. You're absolutely right. That is absolutely where we are. Ukraine is not joining NATO. Ukraine is not joining the EU. They're stuck where they are. All they're doing is they are making themselves into the cow that some people milk. And how long that they're going to let themselves be used in that way it is an open question. I mean, obviously, there's some people in Ukraine who are milking the cow themselves, and there are some people in Ukraine who are so fanaticized on these topics that they're unable to see reason. But there are not that many of those. Sooner or later, one must assume the penny will drop, and more people in Ukraine will realize that this isn't really going anywhere. But to repeat again, with the Russians now saying that NATO membership for Ukraine is a red line, that topic, even the theoretical idea of Ukraine joining NATO is now dead. It's not going to happen. It's closed. Nobody's going to go to war to get Ukraine into NATO. No one is. I mean, the idea that the German soldiers would go fighting in Ukraine for something like that is just a fantasy.
Yeah. I was in Kiev in 2013. I remember when people in Kiev were like making a big fuss about how they want to enter the EU because life in the EU is glorious. Big salaries, a lot of money. Everyone's driving a BMW, and we have to get away from Russia's orbit and enter the European Union. Yeah. And that was coming from Greece to Ukraine. I was just looking at people going, are you guys mad? Yeah. Believe me, the last thing you want is to enter the European Union. I was like, believe me, trust me, as a Greek, I'm telling you, you do not want to enter the European Union. We're not driving Mercedes. We're not driving BMWs. We don't have 5,000 euro a month salaries. It is all fiction. But, you know, the media was pumping them up so hard with this EU dream that it became a sickness.
Yes. I agree. I mean, I've come across people from Ukraine like that. Absolutely. And one doesn't come across them to anything like the same degree anymore, by the way.
Yeah. Anyway, Flying Boar says people in West say Russia's economy is the size of Greece or Scotland. Is that true?
Yeah, or the Galapagos Islands, or wherever. I mean, I have to say this is one of the major problems, and you even find some people who want to argue that Russia is not a threat, and they actually come up with that one. They say, the reason Russia isn't a threat is because it's got a economy the size of the Outer Hebrides. So how can it be a threat? The reality is, it is a very large, very diversified economy. If you use purchasing power parity as the criteria, then it becomes, I think, at the moment, the fifth biggest economy in the world. I think it's bigger than Germany now. So that adjusts it, because, of course, the ruble is very heavily undervalued. Everybody accepts that it is. And if you correct for that, the Russian economy gets much bigger, and it becomes the fifth biggest economy in the world. Now, having been to Russia, having been able to compare Russia with Germany, I'm going to say straight away that I think that is a major underestimate of the scale of the Russian economy. I would put it at roughly the size of Japan's. I mean, we had discussions before about Japan and about the kind of things Japan can do, and Russia can do similar things, and Germany can't. I mean, Germany can't build stealth fighter jets or operate a space program. Russia can. Japan could if it chose to. And that gives you a genuine idea of the scale. The problem is that when people talk about economies and try to compare economies and use GDP as the measure of comparison, people always need to understand that GDP is a statistical construct. And what you're actually doing when you're comparing GDPs or figures for GDP is you're not comparing economies, you are comparing statistics, sets of statistics. If those statistics measure things differently in different countries, then those comparisons aren't really effective anymore. So suffice to say, it's a long way of saying this is a much bigger economy than most people understand. And I think it's one of the reasons, by the way, why Westerners consistently get the sanctions issue wrong. They think this is a tiny economy. If we blockade it, it will all implode. What they don't realize is that this is actually a very big, very diversified economy, which can just shrug sanctions off.
Yeah, John McCain, what did he say? It was a gas station masquerading as a country.
Yeah.
The great John McCain.
Well, exactly. I mean, again, a sign of his profound ignorance and lack of understanding of economics. But, when did you ever meet a neocon? Now, this isn't a rhetorical question, it's a real one. When did you ever meet a neocon who understood anything about economics?
Yeah.
I've never met one. I mean, I've met many neocons, I should say, in my time. I've read heaps of their articles, vast numbers of their articles. And economics is never, let's put it like this, is not something they even think about. It's not part of their understanding of the world. They talk about logistics sometimes, pipelines and trade routes and things of that kind. But even that, they don't never understand the underlying concepts behind these things.
Yeah, they don't need to think about economics because every solution for them is just bomb
Exactly.
it, bomb it.
Exactly.
It's not working out, bomb it. It's working out, bomb it.
Exactly.
That's their solution.
Exactly.
Anyway, Lakeva sends a $99 super chat. Thank you very much, Lakeva.
Thank you.
Ed Lakeva also says in the chat, love your country, national family. How can you love tribe if you haven't loved family? How can you love world if you haven't loved the preceding level of nation? Bankers, transnationals, anyone.
I agree with you completely. We have to be unfortunately, we're on a platform where, some of the people who run it are not perhaps entirely of the same view, but I agree with you.
Yeah.
Once upon a time, that would have been not just a conventional opinion; it was the conventional opinion. I mean, it's within not just my lifetime, but just a relatively short time ago. It's astonishing how perspective on things like this has changed.
Once upon a time, it used to be good to love your country.
Absolutely, yeah.
Once upon a time, like 5 years ago. Anyway, Valley S is in the house moderating the $20 super chat as well. Welcome, Valley S. I think Zariel is also in the house as well, moderating. And I also think I saw Reckless Abandon in the house as well, moderating. Good to have all of you guys with us, and thank you very much. Filipina Traveler says, watching from Switzerland. Greetings from Bambit and Kurt. Thank you very much, Filipina Traveler TV, for that super chat. And Rich says, Japan already has developed stealth fighters of its own, Mitsubishi Shinshin X. They also have their 100% own rocket technology in use and base in Tanegashima, operational for 40 years.
Absolutely. I mean, Japan has a tremendous technological depth and engineering and technological depth. I mean, another thing they've done, I mean, I don't know how effective or successful it is, but they're the first people, for example, to develop conventional submarines with lithium-ion batteries. Now, there's some people I know who think lithium-ion batteries are perhaps not the safest things to have on submarines, but the result is that they have arguably the most powerful conventionally powered submarines in the world. So Japan has an enormous range of things it is able to do and can do. It is in some ways the sleeping giant in international affairs. It could play a major role. I would add that at one level, I think the Japanese, I commend the Japanese for the fact that they have concentrated on building their civilian economy and civilian society, and have not wanted to meddle around the world and throw their weight around and do those sort of things. So I'm not asking the Japanese to change their ways. All I am saying is they have the potential to do it.
Yeah, and Kurt has some statistics here. GDP of Russia 11, Germany 4. PPP of Russia is 6, Germany 5. So there you see.
Yeah,
thank
I
you
absolutely,
for that.
absolutely, it's very good. By the way, I think you'll find that they've switched places over the last.
It's gone 6-5, Germany 6, Russia 5. You mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah,
but
anyway,
yeah.
Yeah, there we go. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Kurt, for that info. Toilet Sauce says, at the rate people are already leaving, not just Ukraine, but also the Baltic states, it is only a matter of time until they stop being Russophobic, because only Russians will be left in what they consider their home. It's a valid point.
It's absolutely
Many
valid
people
point.
don't talk about the Baltic states as well, that you've had a massive exodus of people from Latvia and Lithuania.
Yeah, absolutely. Indeed so. And by the way, they're the nicest, best people from these countries. I mean, I to give just one example, I mean, lots of people from the Baltic states here, and I buy bread from a Lithuanian baker. I mean, she's a woman and her daughter, and they set up a business nearby to where I am. They're having real problems now, like everybody is, but they have Lithuanian bread, and by the way, they also provide Russian bread, or at least bread that they do in a Russian style. They don't have these kind of hang-ups and issues. They're young people. They're entrepreneurial. If things were run well in Lithuania, the country would be flourishing.
Yeah. Luke says, on Japan, it's the iodine and the omega-3s, a beautiful and delicious diet that comes out in performance and intellect.
Well, there you go.
Diet is important, that's for sure. Let's see here. We have a question from Flying Boar. India, China, once friends, then how did they become enemies?
That's a very interesting and complicated topic. It's a huge topic. Now, I also have to say, I think that there is a great deal of, shall we say, not just mystery, but secrecy about this. Because in the 50s, as you absolutely rightly say, China and India were incredibly close. There was a lot of people talking about the fact that they were the two friends. They were working together in the non-aligned movement. They played a critical role in creating the non-aligned movement at the Bandung conference in Indonesia. And the Chinese premier, Zhou Enlai, and the Indian Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, appeared to be extremely close friends. And then, around 1960, it all began to fall apart. And there is some mystery about this. Now, it could be, well, one of the issues definitely was Tibet. And of course, Nehru invited the Dalai Lama to India, and that infuriated China. And India seemed to be backing Tibet against China. And why exactly that happened, again, it's straightforwardly unclear. And then there was those border disputes. I don't want to get into the details of this, but a problem which up to then had appeared to be very much under control and capable of being contained just escalated into outright war. And I am sure that there is a lot of secret history here, a lot of secret history, which between India and China, between India and the US at that time. Remember, in the 50s, China was very much seen as an enemy by the US. The period when the US and China were working together against the Soviets, that hadn't come up yet. So there's a lot of secret history, and we just don't really have it. We don't have all the details. Both New Delhi and Beijing, and I suspect Washington, and no doubt London too, could tell us an awful lot more about what happened and why it all went so disastrously wrong. And it will be fascinating to have a full answer. But it's a topic I'm interested in. I've looked up books on it. None of them really give a fully satisfactory answer as to exactly what happened.
Yeah. Dr. SS says Putin is in India and doing more deals, preparing for sanctions if Ukraine is invaded.
Well,
He's doing deals.
Well,
That's the important part. He's doing deals.
He does deals all the time. He is a major deal maker, and of course he's doing deals, and he's been incredibly well received in India, by the way.
Yeah. Freedom Autopsy Report says, from Lenin's pamphlet, what is to be done? He writes about those in power free from criticism. Isn't the same situation today in the United States with the swamp deep state and the Democrat rhino hegemony above all U.S. laws?
Well, yes. Actually, it's interesting that you bring up that particular pamphlet of Lenin. I'm not going to anticipate. We've got lots about Lenin to talk about, and his pamphlets, many of them, by the way, incredibly insightful. He's a very, very clever man. But absolutely, I mean, the fundamental problem in the US and in the West in general is that we've gone increasingly from a legal system in the United States, which was rooted in the Constitution, based on the law, which had responded to America's democratic principles. I'm not saying it was flawless, it certainly wasn't, but that was its aspiration, to a legal system that has now become purely an instrument, or is becoming an instrument for elite control. And by definition, that means that the elite are in effect no longer held accountable to it. I will say this. We did a recent program with Robert Barnes on locals, in which we discussed a number of court cases. I don't want to go into the details, but it was very striking that even despite elite capture in the United States of a great parts of the legal system, there are some court cases where accountability does exist. And to say it straightforwardly, he achieved a breakthrough in one particular case. I urge you to go to locals. You can hear the whole program there. You can find it also on our other platforms. I think you'll find it very insightful. And I did make a point that in the United States, the law does still provide a defense, not a complete one. And there are still people who are prepared to go to court in the United States and fight, and sometimes they actually win. And so we mustn't completely give up on it. But I think the underlying point you're making is well made. These people do not think of themselves as accountable in the way they once were and in the way they should be. And the legal system in general protects them. But there are still occasions when, to their surprise, they lose.
Yeah. And Alan asks, is India trying to come between Russia and China?
No, I don't think
Or
so.
is Russia trying to patch up relations between the two? That might be the other way of looking at
I
it.
think the second is much more likely. Though the Russians have made it very clear that they do not see themselves as mediators between China and India, and I think they're very wise, by the way. I mean, I think that would just be a recipe for annoying both countries. So they're friendly with both countries. They will suggest to both countries that they meet together and come to joint positions on various things, as they did in that recent foreign ministers conference, but they won't say act as mediators in the dispute over the Indian-Chinese border. So they won't do that. But the Russians have shown this ability to remain friendly with each country without antagonizing the other, to the point where they're able to sell military technology to each country without antagonizing the other. The Indians are now buying S-400 surface-to-air missiles. The US apparently doesn't like it. And there's going to be more arms deals in the pipeline too. And China, which you might expect would be very concerned about it, doesn't seem to be.
Yeah. Cosmic Rain is in the house moderating as well. Welcome, Cosmic Rain. Good to have you here. And we have got a super chat from Elena who says, I echo more live streams of the Duran. Thank you for your commentary. Thank you very much, Elena, for that super chat. And
I love doing them. I really do. As I say, it's my favorite thing that we do. And no doubt we will work towards doing more.
Thank you for that super chat. And Yamabushi170 says, how might China capitalize on a war in Ukraine vis-a-vis their desire to reunite with Taiwan with assault or forceful diplomacy, economic pressure?
Well, I think the way China would capitalize on a war with Ukraine is twofold. Firstly, inevitably, it would refocus American attention away from the Pacific into Europe, which is something that many people in senior positions in the US have been warning against. They say that major challenges from China, the major challenger to the US is China, it's not Russia. And it's China, which has got the bigger economy, much bigger economy, the much bigger navy. We need to try and sort out our problems in Europe so we can focus on China. And instead, if there was a conflict in Ukraine, it would be the opposite, it would be the other way around. The focus of the United States would have to switch back to Europe, and the pressure would be taken off China. That's one thing. The second thing that would happen is that it would bind Russia closer to China, inevitably, because if we're into a sanctions war, an escalation of the sanctions war, if we see Russia disconnected from SWIFT and things like that, the Russians will inevitably have to increase their trading and economic links with China. And from the Chinese point of view, that is very important, because they're looking increasingly to Russia as a great source for raw materials, for food, for energy, for lithium. There's apparently major mines being developed in northern Russia for lithium, for all those kind of things that China needs and at the moment has to import. So from the Chinese point of view, that strengthens the position. The other thing it does is that, of course, it's an example. If there is a war in Ukraine, Ukraine's defeated, Russia wins, it demonstrates to the Chinese that actually you can test the United States in military terms over Taiwan, and you can push things, and there's limits to what the US will do. So it has that sort of effective example. And Anatol Lieven, who is this British journalist I mentioned before, in his latest piece on responsible statecraft, he actually says that. He says one of the reasons why the Western powers should not want a war in Ukraine, which they would lose, is because of the way it would be read in Beijing.
Yeah. Amrit says Japan's demographic situation is a big problem, but the solution that U.S. media gives it is to ease immigration. Japan likes homogeneity. Why would they go the EU way?
Well, they won't go the EU
They
way.
won't.
I mean,
Right.
I know. Actually, I happen to know a lot of Japanese people, and I used to do a lot of work once in a long time ago with Japanese companies and businesses, and I like doing that work a lot. I find them very, very good people to work with. But I mean, the one thing they're absolutely clear about is that they will not accept mass immigration into Japan. I mean, that's just not going to happen.
Yeah. Paulie's says a super chat here, 10 euros. The 6th of December is the birthday of Saint Nicholas in the Netherlands. Buy yourself a hot
Oh,
chocolate.
right.
Actually, the day is the name day of Nicholas.
Yeah,
Do you know that in Greek Orthodox? Maybe in
yeah,
Russian Orthodox as well.
probably.
Today
Yeah,
is the name day, Nicholas. So
yes.
anyone that's named Nicholas or Nikos, happy name day.
Absolutely. Now, I would just say, though, that in certainly the Greece of my childhood, I'm not sure whether this is the case anymore, but the Greek Father Christmas was not St. Nicholas. It was St. Vasily, St. Basil, Aius Vasilis.
Yeah.
Now, that may have changed, with westernization, but
But we still say Saint.
yeah,
You're right.
Aius
Vasily,
Vasilis.
we still say that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but certainly St. Nicholas is definitely somebody we should remember and celebrate. And I love hot chocolate, and I drink it from Duran mugs, and they're perfect for it. By the way,
And Tim Williams sends a DKK 1000 super chat. Thank you very
wow.
much, Tim. That's awesome. Thank you very much for a generous super chat. And the comment there, talking about mugs, is one day in 2525, archaeologists will discover a mint condition mug with a double-headed eagle on it. They will then know that we were not all cavemen after all. Thanks to the Duran. Thank you very much, Tim. That's a very, very smart comment. Hopefully we get to 2525. Let's hope for that.
Yeah.
Let's see. Ham Solo says Trump, Putin, Modi, and Xi will make EU New World Order a moot point. Joe by done. You get that, Alexander? Joe Byedone.
Well, okay, gosh. Well,
Let's
we'll
go,
see.
Brendan.
Let's go. Exactly. Yes.
All right. Thank you very much for that, Ham Solo. Let's see here from Raphael. Guys, what do you make of China's response to the boycott? Quote, we do not care, but understand we are going to stop all your movies to play here after 2.
I presume in boycott you mean boycott
Olympics,
the
I imagine, yeah.
Olympics. I presume so. I'm going to say the Chinese obviously are saying at the moment, look, so far it's a diplomatic boycott. It's top US officials, people of that kind, British officials probably not going to China for the Winter Olympics. The Chinese will shrug their shoulders. They won't care too much about that. If we have a sports boycott, then it's a different story. And I think at that point, and by the way, I think that's quite possible. I mean, I don't think it's going to happen, but I would certainly say it's a very high possibility nonetheless. If that does happen, then there will be very, very real anger in China. And it won't just be at governmental level. I mean, that is an extraordinarily wild thing to do. And I think that I would certainly not advise it.
Yeah, they always pull stuff. They always pull stuff during Olympic Games.
Absolutely.
Always.
Absolutely.
Good distraction.
My own personal view, and I'm going to say this straightforwardly, the Chinese were very lucky with their Olympics in 2008 because at that time it was still Chimerica and nobody was interested at that time in making a big issue of the fact that they were in China and creating problems for China. In all other respects, I think it's extremely dangerous for countries like China and Russia to host big sporting events. It only creates problems. So there's many times you had problems with the Sochi Games. You had problems at the time of the Russian World Cup. We're going to have problems with the Chinese Winter Olympics. It's just a ticket for trouble. If you are the country, if you're either China or Russia hosting these sort of events, they're just not worth They're just not worth it. Better have them happen in the West. Send your athletes there, your sports people, do really well there, and wait for the day when things change.
I agree, but even that's not becoming possible.
No.
I mean, even having like games and events hosted elsewhere and sending your athletes now is also becoming a problem.
Well, indeed. Well, I mean,
for Russia and for China.
Well, look
they
at
get
that.
the doping stuff going and,
I
and
know,
all of that.
exactly. I mean, the whole thing is becoming a nightmare. But remember, the Russian doping problems began with Sochi. I mean, ever since then, it's been a relentless siege of Russian sport. And I suspect we're going to see a relentless siege of Chinese sport on the way before very long.
Well, that's because it's all about breaking down the society, because they understand,
Yeah.
at least in the case of Russia, that Russians do like sports, they like athletics.
Yeah.
They want to break that down. They want to diminish that because they want to demoralize the people.
Yeah.
In the same way that they try to demoralize or diminish for example, orthodoxy or religion.
Exactly.
Or the way they do it in the United States when they try to demoralize the culture and what it means to be American. All of these tricks and tactics are all about just breaking down society and demoralizing the masses so they can usher in their new twisted ideology.
I completely agree.
Without getting into details of it, but I think we all know what I'm getting at and what we're getting at.
Absolutely.
Sparky says the Duran grows as people come to their senses. Thank you very much, Sparky. And Rich says Japan has almost 100% world market share in the most advanced semiconductor production equipment, and the West still wrongly thinks of itself as the trailblazer.
Well, I do think they've got 100%. I think there are other countries that are playing a role, but Japan is an enormously powerful industrial power, a technologically advanced industrial power. And it's absolutely the case. I mean, I can remember back in the 80s, 70s, 80s, when Japan was, seeing the rising force, the dismay there was at that time, the fact that the Japanese were churning out these very, very highly reliable, very advanced equipment. And people of a certain generation in the West, I can remember, who'd assumed that everything that wasn't produced in the West was shoddy and inferior, found that very difficult fact to come to terms with.
Yeah, let's see here. Edward Turner, thank you for your $20 super chat. Mego What, thank you for a €5 super chat. And Hey Man says Starbucks will open hundreds of stores in China every year, and Walmart will be full of Chinese goods indefinitely. Strange to decouple everyone else off from Russia and China when you won't do the same.
Well, indeed, quite so. Can I just say something? The latest story that I'm hearing, and this is unconfirmed, but the latest, we discussed this in a program, but apparently it's now actually gaining traction within the administration, which is to slash tariffs on Chinese goods. And that's the way you're going to bring down the inflation and fill up the shops in the run up to the midterms. And if you want to really go further than that, you could say that one of the reasons you want to distract attention from China and focus it on Russia is it makes it easier to slash those tariffs. But apparently that discussion now is actually happening, and it's happening in a big way. There is some pushback within the administration against it, and there's some worry that if they go down that route, they will actually lose more votes in industrial regions, and that there'll be pushback in Congress as well. But that discussion is taking place.
Yep. And David says, flags and colors aside, when neocon globalists lose, we all win, including Americans and Europeans. Let's go, true. Brandon.
So absolutely true. I mean, the neocons pretend that they are American patriots. They are not. They want to use America and its power in order to achieve their own agendas. They're not. Their approach to the US is a manipulative one. They're not really there to defend American interests. They don't care about the welfare of American people. They are, as I said, power obsessed, and they have particular agendas that they want to act out in combination, obviously, with the globalists of whom, in a way, they are the militant vanguard.
Yeah. Simon Gruber says, apart from France and the US, what other Western countries have national elections in 2022? As chaos develops in Ukraine this winter, how might those events affect these upcoming electoral contests? Well, the
Yes,
big
very
one is
good.
Hungary.
Hungary, it is absolutely by far the biggest, in my opinion, and that's the one that you really need to look at because, of course, if Orban wins, the line is held. If Orban goes, well, the way is open to knock down Poland and to consolidate further the EU system. I presume there's going to be elections in Austria as well, though those look tied down, to be truthful. We'll just see. Hungary is the big vote in Europe. The midterms are the big vote in the United States.
Yeah, I agree with that. Elena Diaz says, will China help the US economically like they did in 2008 if inflation keeps spiraling up?
The Chinese will not help the United States unless the United States does things in favor of China. A week ago, or 10 days ago, the United States, well, at the time of the Xi Jinping Biden summit, Biden asked China to release oil from their strategic reserves as part of a coordinated move to bring down oil prices. The Chinese considered it, and in the end, they refused. So there was no release of oil from China's strategic reserves. And I am sure that's going to be the line the Chinese are going to take. The only kind of help, if it is help, that China will give the United States is if the United States cuts tariffs, in which case, as we said, Chinese goods will flow to the United States in vast quantities. That might dampen inflation, might cause more problems, and it will, of course, further undermine the US industrial base.
Yeah, if it can get in, if those goods can get in.
If they can get in, that's the other thing, because of course we haven't talked much about the crisis in the ports, which, by the way, I understand is getting worse. I mean, one of the things, it's so typical of the way things are done now. Apparently, the ports on the West Coast, it was becoming embarrassing to have all those ships in the distance waiting to unload. So how do you solve that problem? You move them further away so they're beyond the horizon.
All optics.
Yeah, all optics, exactly. But apparently the actual situation is getting worse, not better.
Don't worry, Buttigieg is on the case.
Absolutely.
Kamala's handling the border and Buttigieg is handling the supply stuff. So
absolutely,
we're in good hands.
Absolutely. We're in very good hands.
Yeah. Let's see. Raphael says here, Putin is not Khrushchev, but make no mistake, just like Khrushchev, Putin is ready to go anywhere to protect Russia. They love Russia to death.
Absolutely. Well, Putin is a much more intelligent man than Khrushchev was, I should say. So I think that, and of course, he's unlike Khrushchev, he's a highly educated man. I mean, one of the things about Khrushchev was that he actually learned he gained his education very late, and he didn't have that knowledge of the world that Putin does. I mean, Putin has a far better insight into the way the world works than Khrushchev did. Khrushchev was prepared to defend Russia's interests. He was terrible at diplomacy. He wrecked Russia's relations with China. He was on bad terms with lots of different people. Putin, on the contrary, defends Russia, but he's the man who cuts deals. And he goes to India, and he's able to speak to Modi and develop good relations with India. And he, at the same time, secures Russia's position all the time. He's also a very systematic and methodical man. He builds up his position, and then he moves forward, and then builds it up some more. Whereas Khrushchev was very impulsive.
Yeah. Maria, thank you for your super sticker. Thanks for being you super sticker. Thank you very much, Maria, for that. And Toilet Sauce says, keep in mind, Russia also has a considerable gray economy. Some people estimate that alone is the size of Italy's official GDP.
That's absolutely true.
Excellent point.
That's a very good point. Absolutely. I mean, there's lots of things. Russia is a difficult. In some ways, Russia has a massive grey economy. In other areas, it's very transparent. But it's a difficult economy sometimes to read and get an overall sense of. For one thing, the country is so big. You have to go to Russia to get a real sense of how vast it is. And that makes it difficult sometimes, even for the Kremlin, to have a complete idea of what's going on in all the various different parts of Russia.
Yeah. Flying Boar Super Chat says update on Bosnia.
Yeah, this is something the British in particular are getting incredibly worked up about. Now, I can't remember his name, but the Bosnian Serb leader has been making signals that he might be thinking of pulling the Serb area of Bosnia, the Republika Srpska, out of Bosnia. And the media here in London are going absolutely berserk about this, and they're saying that there is a Russian hand behind it, and that this is all part of a sinister Russian plot to destabilize the Balkans. And recently, we learned that this Bosnian Serb leader actually went to Moscow and had a private meeting with Putin, no less. Now, what was that? What that was all about? Nobody quite knows, because the Russians didn't release a readout of the conversation. In fact, they tried to keep the meeting secret. It was leaked to, I think, in the Serbian media, but who knows what exactly is going on. But I come back to the underlying story, the point I've made many times in many programs. The way Yugoslavia was destroyed, and it was destroyed by the Western powers, means that you have what is, by Balkan terms, a well-organized and powerful country, Serbia, surrounded by unstable microstates, Bosnia, Kosovo, Macedonia, Montenegro, all of which have issues with Serbia, and against all of which Serbia potentially has irredentist claims. It means that this is an inherently unstable situation, and sooner or later something is going to break down. Now, it might be in the next few weeks in Bosnia. If there is a crisis in Bosnia, the Russians will be there. I mean, they're not directly, obviously, connected to Bosnia, but they will back Serbia, and they will back the Serbs in Bosnia. And it will be much more real than what happened in the 90s, when Russia was in a mess and not able to do anything very much. And when there were many people in Moscow, the oligarchs, were perfectly happy to sell the Serbs down the river. That isn't going to be the case anymore. So potentially a big crisis over Bosnia coming soon. But even if it doesn't come soon, sooner or later, that crisis in the Balkans is going to come.
Yeah. And just look at the deals being made. Vucic struck a really, really sweet deal with Russia on gas and energy.
Absolutely.
Something that Europe cannot do.
Absolutely. And he's imported more Russian tanks, T-72 tanks, modernized T-72 tanks, and all sorts of things of that kind.
Yeah. Look at where the business flows, and you'll get an idea as to where things are moving. From Heyman says, sovereign nations are oppressed and rainbow colonies are free. Thank you very much for that super chat. Hey, man. And let's see. Command Unit says the Berlin airport fiasco showed the Germans are incompetent at managing abundant resources. They are only good at managing them when they are limited.
Yeah, this is actually correct. And I'm going to say something, because I know Germany very well. And Germany is on the same sort of trend that Britain was, in that with every single year it becomes less efficient. I mean, I can remember Britain in the 1960s, and everything worked with clockwork efficiency, but you could sense that at the same time things were gradually beginning to go wrong and break down. Well, Germany's in exactly the same place. It's like Britain, not exactly 1960, more like Britain in about 1975. Outwardly, everything works still very well, but you see more and more problems at more and more places. I'm going to make a further prediction. The new German government's going to make that worse.
Yeah, they're not off to a good start.
No.
at all.
No, I mean it already looks dysfunctional, and parts of it, I'm going to say it straightforwardly, look irrational. So I mean, it's not going to work. It's not going to work well.
You know our saying in Greece, right, Alexander? When it comes to politicians, the next one is always worse than the previous.
Well, indeed.
And the next one is always worse
Well,
than
indeed.
the previous.
Well, indeed.
And these guys in Germany are not.
I know. I mean, God help us, we might even miss Merkel one day.
I was just about to say the same thing. It's like Merkel's going to look good compared to these guys.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh boy. Bromwell says, what is the basis for Switzerland enjoying neutrality in past European conflicts? Can the rest of us have some of that action?
You know, the interesting thing is it goes all the way back to the Congress of Vienna in 1815. This is the Congress which defeated of the victorious powers after the defeat of Napoleon, and they all came together, and for all kinds of complicated diplomatic reasons, all the statesmen who were there, Metternich, Talleyrand, Tsar Alexander I, Castlereagh of Britain, they all jointly issued this statement saying that Switzerland would enjoy perpetual neutrality. Now, the reason they did that was because during the Napoleonic Wars, Switzerland was actually quite an important route for armies to move around. There's a very famous story in recent Russian military history of how a Russian army marched across the Alps during the Napoleonic War. It's a curious event, which is people don't talk about very much. So it was an important invasion route. It was seen as a way of stabilizing the situation in Europe to say that Switzerland would enjoy permanent neutrality. The Swiss embraced it and flourished as a result of it. And I understand that it is passionately supported in Switzerland today. So it goes back to the Congress of Vienna. It's existed ever since. It's a sign of the statesmanship of the leaders of that time, which is such a contrast to the abysmal quality of leadership today. And it's worked successfully ever since.
All right. Porphyrogenitis says, is India's perspective China shifted from an anti-colonist ally to a colonialist enemy? Sorry, from an anti-colonialist ally to a colonialist enemy when they conquered and colonized Tibet.
Well, yeah, okay. So first of all, you seem to be somebody who's interested in Byzantine things. I say that because of your name, but anyway, that's the first thing to say. But I come back to this. I am not completely. I am not complete. I mean, I don't fully understand why Indian policy towards China changed in the 60s and changed so completely, why there was this complete turnaround. I know a lot of people think it was connected to the vanity of the Indian Prime Minister Jawaharlal Pandit Nehru, that he'd been very much the sort of de facto leader of the non-aligned movement. He felt that Zhou Enlai was starting to take the shine off him, and that there may have been some element of that. I don't know, and I don't know whether colonialism or anti-colonialism or those sort of feelings that existed certainly in the 50s, very strongly in the 50s, what role they played in this. I mean, bear in mind that in the 50s, China was seen as a major leader in the fight against colonialism. So there are so many unanswered questions that I can't really answer that. I don't personally think a colonial dimension had any real role in this quarrel. I suspect that it was more to do with great power competition between India and China. Who would lead the non-aligned movement? Who would which of the two would be dominant in the Himalayas? Those sort of things. But exactly how it came about, exactly why we ended in the situation that we did, it's an unanswered question. I don't think anybody outside the archivists in these countries knows the full answer to that question.
Yeah, Thank you, Brian, for that super chat. And Flying Boars super chat says, update on Nord Stream 2 and why is it not certified?
Why is it not certified? Well, the reason it's not certified is because there was a court decision in Germany back in the summer which said that Nord Stream 2 is subject to the third energy package, which means that there has to be unbundling on that part of Nord Stream 2, which operates on German territory. Now, Nord Stream 2, the third energy package means that the company that pipes the gas must be a different company from the company that distributes the gas. But specifically, it seems that this is limited to the pipeline on German soil. So what Gazprom has said to the German regulator is, look, there's been this court decision. We understand that this is the law. We understand that we can't operate the pipeline ourselves. What we're going to do is we're going to set up a German subsidiary company, which is going to run this thing separately from our own operating company, which is based in Switzerland. So it's an attempt to find a loophole through the law. The German regulator seems to be willing to go along with that. That's the gist of the statement that the German regulator said, and that means that the certification process has been suspended until that subsidiary company is created. Now, anybody who knows anything about setting up subsidiary companies, anybody who does work on transfer of undertakings, in other words, transferring the business of one company to a different company, knows that this is an enormously complex job, legally speaking. And if you're talking about something as complex and as sophisticated as Nord Stream 2, the complexities of doing that are simply enormous. I mean, it means transferring rights to contracts, transferring rights, employment contracts. It's a huge job. Now, it would take time to set up this subsidiary company in Germany and to have it in a position where it can operate the pipeline without it being done indirectly through the main company, which is in Switzerland. I am convinced this is the reason for the original regulator's decision. Now, that doesn't mean that politics won't rear its head, that there won't be attempts to delay or prevent certification of Nord Stream 2 entirely. But what I have heard over the last couple of days is that there was a big discussion about Nord Stream 2 within the German coalition, the new coalition that's emerging, the new German government. The Greens have been told by the two coalition partners, the SPD and the Free Democrats, that we absolutely desperately need this gas because Germany is going through a major shortage of energy and that our car industry is in crisis. And the Greens accepted that they would not push for any, they would not push against Nord Stream 2 and have quietly accepted that it will be certified. So I think it will be certified probably around April. There'll be another 2-month period when the European Union will have to decide whether or not to rubber stamp this, in which case it will be up and running sometime around June.
Okay, Kurt Fram says, and the reason Switzerland neutrality can be kept is that the wealthy don't want to mess with all the money they have in the CH banks.
Oh, I forgot to mention that. That is so very true.
One of the most important.
That is,
excellent.
That's probably the single most important
Yeah,
reason.
exactly. Dr. SS says, people forget that Russia has all the critical closed cycle technologies. Sanctions will have no impact. I think the Americans have forgotten Afghanistan and still want another humiliation.
This is so true. I mean, it's absolutely correct. I mean, if you want to look at a country that is almost by definition going to be resistant to sanctions pressure, it's going to be Russia. I mean, they produce all the energy they need and more, far more. They are a major food producer. That wasn't the case in 2014, but they're now essentially self-sufficient in food. Nobody's going to go hungry in Russia because of sanctions. They now have a functioning financial system which is controlled by the Russian central bank and on which the Russian government is able to float bonds, which it wasn't able to do in 2014. So the Russian government doesn't have to go to the international markets in order to raise financing. It can actually do it on the domestic Russian market by floating what are called OFZs there. And it's also, as you absolutely rightly say, got a closed cycle industrial economy. They produce everything. I mean, they make aircraft, ships, microchips, you name it, they make it. They may not be the world's most advanced microchips, but they do make them increasingly. So they can resist sanctions. It's a big continental economy. It's exactly the sort of economy that logically you shouldn't want to sanction.
Yeah. And from Moon Dragon, imagine if the EU were smarter and they got Russia into the Union. Today, the situation would be different. Your take on it, gentlemen?
Well, I heard so many people talk about this back in the early 2000s, but of course the view was we absolutely do not want Russia in the EU because it's too big and it will dominate it. And lots of countries, I mean, the British were adamantly opposed. The Germans weren't keen. The French might have considered it, but in any event, it didn't happen. This despite the fact that you had people like Barroso, who was at that time the president of the EU Commission, going all the way to Vladivostok and saying in front of a stony-faced Putin, it's an extraordinary picture, this is Europe, Vladivostok is Europe too. What they wanted was an EU that would be every other country except Russia, and Russia would be the natural resources hinterland, which would provide the oil and the gas and the raw materials and all of that. And their approach to Russia was essentially extractive. That was also what the third energy package was supposed to be all about, breaking up the Russian energy industries, getting European companies to develop the gas and the oil in places like Western Siberia and the Arctic and all the rest. The Russians said no, and that's why we're in the crisis we're in.
Yeah. No Sense says, in my opinion, a Russian blitz in Ukraine would actually save Taiwan. A prolonged confrontation would draw in U.S. resources and make Taiwan more vulnerable.
Yeah, it would. I think this is true. The United States was tied down in Europe. Then realistically, the chance of resisting Chinese moves towards Taiwan diminishes. At which point, possibly, just possibly, the government in Taiwan and people there might start to say to themselves, well, we can't rely on the US in the way we did. Maybe the best thing to do is to talk to Beijing and cut a deal.
Yeah.
I'm not, it's difficult to know how these things can work out, but certainly that's one possible scenario, so it seems to me.
Raphael says, guys, Putin in a press conference said China will not have to use force to regain Taiwan. I believe it is done. It is a done deal already. Everybody knows.
He did say that. He did say that. I don't think it's a done deal already. And I think what he was basically saying is that the Chinese would not themselves initiate action against Taiwan, very much like Russia in Ukraine. They would be looking for the other side to make a move first. In Ukraine's case, an attack on the Donbass. In China's case, a declaration by Taiwan of independence from China. I think the Chinese have made it very clear that's a red line for them. And if that red line is not crossed, I think the Chinese feel confident that eventually gravity will pull Taiwan towards them.
Yeah. JW Gamer is a new member to the Duran community. Welcome, JW Gamer, to the community. And Sparky says, anti-Trump Republicans are stirring up abortion issues to derail Trump candidates in 2022. They'd rather elect establishment Democrats than Trumpers.
So true. Now, we have to be very careful in our discussion. But I'm going to say very briefly that if there's one thing that the Democrats might be able to work with, it's perhaps that issue that you've discussed, It's the only thing I can think of, which if there was an economic crisis, might win them back some votes if this really became a top issue. And I know that there are some people on the Republican side who are thinking about this, and I also know that there are some people on the Mitch McConnell side of the party who would not be sorry if establishment Democrats won votes instead of Trump Republicans. Now, having said that, saying that all of this connects together and that Republicans are deliberately recreating this issue in order to set up that type of scenario, I think that goes too far for me. I mean, I haven't seen the evidence of it, but certainly I know that some of those discussions and concerns have been expressed. I actually read an article, I think it was on National Review, which is a very much establishment Republican anti-Trump news magazine, in which they were floating that very thought.
Yeah. Freedom Autopsy Report says, could a Varangian diaspora congregate and save this damned world?
Varangian.
Varangian is
well, the
what the Greeks did.
Yeah, the Varangian guard.
The Greeks referred to the Rus.
Yeah, to the Rus.
Yes.
Yeah. I suppose yes, as is the answer. Quite
way back long ago.
Well, you were talking about a long time ago. Exactly. This is the imperial guard of the Byzantine emperor, and as I said, they were recruited from the Rus. Kievan Rus, and by the way, also to some extent from Anglo-Saxons. And they were probably the best troops in the world, and they did hold things together in the empire for a long time.
Yeah. Evgeny Litz says, what do you think of the U.S. Congressman Massey and his family posing with guns? I don't know if you saw that. It was like a Christmas postcard
I haven't seen it.
I think he's a senator or he's in Congress.
Right. Yeah,
I think he's just in Congress. Anyway, there was a big uproar because he posed with guns, and okay.
Well, what's the problem?
I don't know. I didn't think of it as that big of an issue, but okay, it is what it is.
Yeah,
it is what it is. I don't really have much of an opinion on it. If he wants to do a photo with him and his family posing with guns, I guess all right. I mean, I don't know. I don't know.
Okay.
Thank you for that question. Rit says Japan has many technological giants from Sony, Panasonic, Mitsubishi, Nikon, Canon, Epson, Casio, etc. Does Europe have even one like those?
No, is the short answer. I mean, to be completely fair, there's a lot of small, good tech companies in Britain. They're quite small, and they do things on. If you're into sound systems, for example, if you really want the absolute best sound system, you will find sort of small British companies make some really outstanding ones, for example. And you also get in France, the French have some pretty good high-tech industries, and so do the Italians, and so do the Germans. But the big global giants, Europe just isn't there, to an embarrassing degree, actually.
Yeah. John Mann says with the Massey, badass looking family, don't rob them. And C Drive says Massey is a Ron Paul libertarian, good guy.
Right, there you go.
I mean, I can see why they try to make I think it goes back to the abortion question, that the Democrats are trying to find certain policies and certain things that they can create a rallying point around, because they're in just such a dismal situation that they're trying to find anything that can get their base energized. And where do you go? You look at abortion, you can look at Second Amendment and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I don't really. I mean, it's not as if he's doing anything that's either threatening or illegal, as far as I can see. So, I'm not sure what the topic is. Of course, in Britain, where we have a different attitude to gun ownership, if a politician did that, it would create a much more understandable uproar. But in the United States, where, with the Second Amendment issues and all that, I mean, I don't really understand. I haven't seen this picture. I don't understand why this is a topic for discussion, actually.
Yeah. Renat, thank you for your super chat. HK50, thank you for that very much. And Kurt says, update on MH17. Any conclusions yet?
Well, there aren't any conclusions. We have this case that's dragging on in the Netherlands. And I'm going to say straightforwardly, I have absolutely no belief that this case is going to end in any other way than as a reassertion of the established narrative, because the way in which the evidence is being heard, evidence that appears to support the narrative, is being listened to, including evidence which, to my mind, is inadmissible. Evidence. Let me explain what I mean by that. A lot of this relates to radio intercepts. Trouble is, some of those radio intercepts, we know, it's accepted, were doctored. And yet, despite the fact that we know that some of the radio intercepts were doctored, the Dutch court is choosing to hear all of the intercepts. Now, there's a legal principle that you don't take water from a poisoned well. If you've got proof that some of the material that's been provided to you has been corrupted, you don't assume the integrity of the rest. And there are obvious reasons for that, because you can doctor things in all kinds of ways, and it might not be quite so open. Nonetheless, the Dutch court is deciding to accept this radio intercept evidence, which, to all intents and purposes, by the way, is the evidence. But it is refusing to consider what looks to me much more important evidence, much more substantive evidence. For example, the issues about the serial numbers of the missile, where it was sent from, things of that kind. So I can't see how this is going to end with anything else other than an outcome, a negative outcome. There's always a chance that the Dutch judges will turn around and say that the case is not made, but I generally don't think so.
All right. Vinicius Braga Sobral says, could you comment on the role and impact of the anti-corruption court in Maidan, Ukraine? Sergio Moro wants to do one here in Brazil if elected in 2022.
Yeah,
that's a front, though.
It is.
It's a front. Yeah,
it's a front. Can I just say so? The very last thing you should do in Brazil is copy what they're doing on the anti-corruption front in Ukraine. The purpose of these institutions, these so-called anti-corruption institutions that exist in Ukraine, are to lock up people that the powerful people in Ukraine don't like, in order to make corruption easier, because that's the effect of it. Nobody takes these institutions in Ukraine seriously. Nobody thinks that Ukraine is becoming less corrupt because of them. On the contrary, all the evidence is that corruption in Ukraine is getting worse. So don't copy these institutions in Ukraine. They don't work. They're not intended to work in that kind of way. That's not what they're about at all. They are political instruments used to knock out opponents.
Yep. Sparky says, negative birth rates and single parenthood no longer carrying a stigma in the West, diminished the political usefulness of the abortion issue.
Well, maybe. I think this is a subject which, if we're going to discuss, we should talk about it on Locals. There's a lot which could be said about these court cases that are coming up in the Supreme Court. But to be entirely frank, I'm afraid that if we do that, then we could have problems with our platform host.
Command Unit says, fun fact, Switzerland joined the UN in 2002. On a less fun note, there is some talk about EU famine because of the energy supply resource crisis.
Right. The first point is absolutely right. Switzerland took a very long time to join the UN. And the reason was that many people in Switzerland felt that would violate Switzerland's neutrality provisions. thing to understand about the United Nations is that it originated, this is a fact people don't realize, it originated as a military alliance. To be specific, the military alliance that fought Hitler in the Second World War. If you go back and read literature that was actually written during the Second World War, especially in the United States, even before the United Nations organization was created, the Allied armies that were fighting Hitler were referred to as the United Nations forces. So it was an alliance. It was an alliance that evolved into an organization. But people in Switzerland looked at it and said it still has its origins in an alliance. The Security Council is called the Security Council. It still has a Chiefs of Staff committee. If we join it, we compromise our position as a neutral state. Now, I think reality is that the UN today is very different from the UN of the 1940s, and Switzerland itself has evolved and changed. Perhaps they don't take their neutrality quite such a pure form as they used to do. So that's why the Swiss eventually decided to join the UN. Now, on the second point, I'm afraid you're absolutely right. We are looking at a potential food crisis around the world. One of the problems is that there is a massive growing shortage of nitrogen-based fertilizer. The reason is that nitrogen-based fertilizer is a derivative of the natural gas industry. Because of natural gas shortages around the world, natural gas is being disproportionately used for heating and isn't being used by the chemical industry to produce fertilizer. And of course, in combination with that, all the political and geopolitical tensions are preventing exports of the products that make fertilizer, one of the major exporters of them being, of course, Russia. So we are looking at a potential food crisis in 2022. Indeed, there is an acquaintance of mine who I've mentioned before on previous live streams, who's somebody who actually provides advice to some Republican congressmen, who wrote to me recently and said that expect 2022 to be a famine year. We are looking at prospects of famine in many places around the world, not obviously in the developed countries, but elsewhere in some places, famine is now a real possibility.
Freedom Autopsy Report says, what about the Russian settlers who founded Nikolaev as an example at the time of Catherine the Great? Did they feel Russian?
Of course they did. So did the Russians who set up Odessa and Kherson and all these places. Of course they thought of themselves as Russian. They didn't think that the question at that time did not arise. I mean, this is a fact which many people in the West simply cannot accept or get their heads around. But no Russian is ever going to stop thinking of cities like Odessa and Kharkov and Nikolaev as Russian cities. Whatever people may say. And it was the people in these cities also think of themselves as Russians, or at least as people profoundly connected to Russia.
All right, Ashley, welcome to the Duran community. Sparky says, Nehru was angry. His jackets went out of style.
That's very true. They were replaced by Mao jackets. I find it difficult myself to tell the two apart, but there we go.
Very smart.
I'm never quite sure which Blofeld wears, by the way, whether it's a Nehru jacket or a Mao jacket. But anyway, there we are. Speaking of, just to say in parentheses, I remember in the 70s, Nehru jackets in London were absolutely a la mode. And there were some people, some sort of advanced people, who actually used to wear them to events in place of dinner jackets. Something I didn't approve of at all, but there we go. Virtually vanished today. You never see them. No.
Yeah. Thank you, Sparky, for that super chat. Jay Galt says, anti-abortion blue hairs always vote anyway. Working class Evangelicals are less reliable voters. It's a political winner, but bad for demographics.
I don't dispute that at all. I understand that point as well. It's all I would say is I take all that on board. It's just a subject on this platform that I'm a bit concerned about getting into. For one thing, I would like to discuss at some point the legal case, the various legal cases.
We'll hit it. We'll hit it on locals. Yeah.
I think we will, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Because there seems to be a lot of interest on it.
Yeah.
There is a lot of interest in and around
Well,
it. Peter says, in recent weeks, I've heard Putin speaking of finding a new form of capitalism and creating sustainable development. He is entertaining cancerous concepts that the UN loves. I can't understand why. I agree. I agree with that. We've talked about this a lot, Alexander. That Putin is he's a great leader. That's my opinion on Putin. That he's a great leader, but he does make certain decisions that sometimes you sit back and you say, "Why?"
Well, Putin is a person who is on a journey, and you never quite know what the end point will be. When he first became president of Russia, it's a point people always overlook. He was somebody in those days who wanted Russia to join NATO, join the EU, appointed arch liberals to run the economic ministries, was very much a person signed up to the globalization agenda in those days. And then he gradually changed. And I mean, I can remember, for example, at that time, he used to argue no point in building aircraft in Russia because it's more practical to buy them from Europe and the United States. I mean, I can remember him talking like that. And then he shifted position. And then he has shifted position again. There's never a clear end point with Putin. He is in some ways, if you like, a person. He's a working. Yeah. Okay. That's not a bad.
Sorry.
That's not a bad. And sometimes you get him talking like he used to talk, and then other times he talks quite differently, and you can never pin him down on things like this. But a more useful thing to do, I think, rather than look at what Putin says, is look at what the Russian government does. And here there are contradictory things too. In terms of economics, they are now clearly moving towards a much more sovereigntist style. No question. You're looking at economics, it's all about import substitution, creating barriers, protecting domestic industries, introducing planning mechanisms. That's what they're about. Other things, well, policies on the coof, identical to what you see in many Western countries. So it's not straightforward.
Yeah, it's not straightforward. Let's see. A Wonderful Life said, Bismarck said the secret to politics was to make a great treaty with Russia. After Kaiser Wilhelm II and Hitler, has the West learned anything?
No, they haven't, and they should really read Bismarck because, of course, Bismarck understood the Russians very well. He was ambassador in St. Petersburg. He spoke Russian. He actually wrote parts of his diary. This is for himself in Russian, and he actually liked Russia, which is more than any other Western leader since then has ever done, as far as I can tell anyway. Well, de Gaulle quite liked Russia. But, I mean, Bismarck knew the Russians very well, and he made all kinds of interesting comments about Russia, which no Western leader ever seems to absorb. I mean, he once said, for example, that a preemptive war against Russia is like choosing suicide to avoid death. So I mean, he made comments like that. He was absolutely somebody who believed that friendship and peace with Russia was the key to success in Europe and to preserving European peace. And it's a tragedy that he's never listened to on these topics. He has great quotes.
Great quotes.
Yeah. Great quotes. I mean, my favorite one is the one about Russia. It's the where he says that the Russians always come for their money, that you can sometimes force them into agreements when they're weak, but in which they seem to sort of give up, make major concessions. But if you force them or trick them into all of this, what you will find is that those agreements in the end don't help you, because they will always come for their money in the end. And that you should always play with the Russians, straight or not at all.
Yep. Flying Boar says, I heard you guys say that the neocons hate Trotsky. Was Trotsky a neocon?
No, I didn't say that he hated Trotsky. We said that a lot of the
Or had. Oh, sorry, had. Okay.
Yeah,
had,
a lot of neocons originated from the Trotskyist community in New York, especially, and the sort of major point of change came in the 60s and early 70s, when a lot of the people who had been previously Trotskyists suddenly converted and became neocons, and they took with them much of the style of their previous politics, and also a lot of their obsessions. So you could say continuous revolution, animus towards Russia, all those sort of things.
Yep.
It's been, can I just say, there's actually been academic literature on this. It's not, I think, what I've just said is not controversial.
Yeah. Rich says, Italy used to have Olivetti on that level since the 1960s to the 90s, and then came the EU, and Italy caught the disease. Today, Olivetti has quite diminished. Yeah, Olivetti has really diminished.
Oh, absolutely. I haven't heard of them for ages. I mean, it's a good point, actually, because they used to be such a big and impressive company, and they've just faded into
That's what the EU does.
It does, exactly. Well, exactly.
That is what the EU does. Kurt says, I don't get jab because I now save a fortune on restaurant bills. That's a good point. You do save money.
You do save money, absolutely.
Very good point.
Yeah,
Kurt, Leafy Bug says, a U.S. president could, with a few pen strokes, excise the malignant parts of the permanent bureaucracy. Sadly, the process of becoming president meant the winner could only get to the top via accepting compromising interagency support or as a loyal member. Trump was an exception, but he was ultimately intimidated into not moving against the interagency. Trump's legacy is that he made an authentic political outsider willing to take on the interagency, a desirable mainstream choice. Well said.
Well, I think that is an exceptionally insightful and very good comment, actually. I mean, I don't really have anything to add there.
Well said.
I think every part of it, every point of it is true. By the way, I mean, the one useful thing we've learned as a result of the Trump experience is this word interagency.
Yes, we have.
And this is...
That's what they call themselves.
That's what they call themselves, exactly. Yeah.
We call them the deep state, but they call themselves the interagency.
The interagency, exactly. Sounds like something out of a Bond film, actually.
Absolutely.
I mean, it really does, but it exists.
The interagency. Andy McGetchen says Russia embroiled in Ukraine would stop them from offering distraction in support of China vis-a-vis Taiwan.
No, I think, this is where I'm going to take a different view from a lot of mainstream view. I think that many people assume that, first of all, they assume that Russia is tied down in Ukraine. Well, it manifestly isn't. Russia has an active foreign policy. We've seen Putin going to India. We've seen Russia intervening in Syria. We've seen Russia forging links with China. They're not tied down by the crisis in Ukraine. If there was a war in Ukraine, well, obviously the mechanics would be different. But I think that the idea that the Russians would find themselves bogged down in a war in Ukraine is based on a serious misunderstanding of the situation in Ukraine. I think two things would happen if the Russians found themselves in control of large areas of Ukraine. In eastern Ukraine, which is the only part of Ukraine, I think, that the Russians are interested in, I think most people would be relieved, actually. I think it would be an escape from a trap that they find themselves in. I think they would not have any problems in most of eastern Ukraine. Even if they went further west, I think the extent of resistance would be far less than some people imagine. So I don't think the Russians would be bogged down in a war in eastern Ukraine or in any part of Ukraine. I think this is a wishful thinking in the West. It is not based on realities.
Yeah. I think that there was a lot of people in Kharkiv, even in Odessa, who would be very, very happy with the Russian passport.
Absolutely. I have no doubt of it.
And they would find an escape out of this economic death spiral.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I entirely agree. I would add also, by the way, that on the economics, and again, I know many people who say that, this is a black hole and occupying eastern Ukraine would be massively expensive for Russia and all that. It would certainly be expensive initially. But if it were reintegrated with Russia, the synergies would very rapidly come back into play. I think in the long term, it would be fine. And I don't mean, when I say the long term, I don't mean 5, 10, 20 years. I mean pretty rapidly, within a couple of years. Again, I think people, because Eastern Ukraine has been wrecked economically because of the wrong policies which have been followed, I think people underestimate the degree to which it could recover rapidly if it properly integrated again in the economy to which it naturally belongs.
Hey Man says, when China has money problems, they build Jack Ma and billionaires. When we have money problems, we print money and build the middle class with inflation. That's a pretty good point.
So many good comments today. People are coming up with one good comment after another. Yeah. I mean, that well done. Can't say anymore.
Well done. Hey,
completely agree.
Here's another good comment, actually, from Command Unit, which says Putin calls coup lockdowns weekly vacations, and they usually have a clear end date and only implemented during high points.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, he imposed a very, very hard lockdown in March 2020, which continued until I think about June, or May, or anyway. But he hasn't done a really hard lockdown like you see in some places in the West since then. But what, of course, we have seen is a steady tightening up on things like QR codes and those sort of things. So there is a greater degree of flexibility, and they've also been saying that they are going to use persuasion. They're not going to go down the Austrian route and things of that kind. But then, of course, they also said that they weren't going to go for QR codes at one time. So you can't be sure.
You can't be sure, exactly. Flying Boar says Russia should look at East Ukraine because it's very industrial compared to the rest of Ukraine.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to be straightforward again, and I want to reiterate this, it's the only part of Ukraine that I can imagine the Russians being seriously interested in. They have some emotional connection to Kiev. But I mean, I think they recognize that Kiev doesn't want to be part of Russia. Go ahead. Yeah, Alex, you say.
No, I was just going to say they're interested also in just getting all the sea property as well.
Exactly. In fact, it's a coherent block of territory from Kharkiv in the northeast to Odessa in the southwest. You could draw a clear line. You break it off. And from your point of view, you've got all of Ukraine. From a Russian point of view, you've got all of Ukraine you want or can use.
You've got full control of the Black Sea, pretty much.
Absolutely, yeah.
That would be a big checkmate. Anyway, Raphael says, "Oh, you guys are still here." On a lighter note, do you guys like eggnog like us now? And do you guys order Chinese food on New Year's Eve like us?
Well, Chinese food I love and eat regularly, and Japanese food. Some people were talking about it previously. Christmas, I tend to have much more conventional British style foods, to be truthful. So I can't really say that's what I have. Eggnog, not really. Truth.
Chinese food. Everyone loves Chinese food.
Everybody loves
I'm
Chinese
with you on that
food.
one.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's everything, Alexander.
That's everything. Wow.
We got one more. One more from Marit that came in.
Yeah.
Even though Japan is a U.S. ally, when it came to critical aspects of their economy, they are committed to maintaining an almost 100% Japanese supply chain.
There you go. That's absolutely true. I mean, I agree with that also. I mean, the Japanese made some very bad decisions in the 80s, which they're still paying the price for to this day. But it still remains a very industrially very strong economy, and potentially one which could achieve remarkable things.
Yeah. All right. We got everything. Thank you to all the comments, all the super chats.
Yeah.
Great super chats. Pamina came in with a great super chat. Tim with a big super chat. Lakena, if I remember correctly,
Yeah.
came in with a big super chat. Lots of super chats, of course. Great questions.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
Flying Boar and Sparky and Heyman and Command. I'm just running through the list of all the
Yeah.
great questions and super chats. Kurt.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for a really, really good live stream. Amrit came in with a lot of great comments as well.
Yeah.
Flying Boar says, Volkov, the new leader of the Navalny organization, admits they got funding from the West and they are looking to destabilize Russia. I think I missed that super chat. Yeah.
Yeah, they are, absolutely. But the other thing they've said, by the way, is that they believe that their organization has been heavily infiltrated by Russian intelligence. So I'm sure both are true. Both are true. They were both a project for destabilization, one which has failed utterly, by the way. And I think they've been very heavily penetrated as well.
Yeah. Let me just make sure I got everything because sometimes I miss things.
Yeah.
Alexander, I think I got everything here.
Right.
Thank you to the moderators as well. Valies, Zariel, Allen, Reckless, GEC, Cosmic Rain. Who else? I think I got everybody. Did I get everyone? Yeah. Great job, moderators. 1,100 plus likes.
Wow.
Fantastic.
Wow.
Fantastic.
Wow.
Thank you for keeping the live stream moving along. Just a great conversation that took place. Any final thoughts as we sign off, Alexander?
Well, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what happens tomorrow. I suspect it'll be a dialogue. Well, if it's a dialogue between Putin and Biden, which isn't going to change anything or make any difference, to be straightforward. The only thing it will do is to provide Putin with that great opportunity to set out his red lines and to demand the treaty that he's now seeking. So that's all. But we are in very interesting times, and to put it mildly, and we must never forget that a lot of the things we're seeing happening in the world, they basically originate in the United States, and it's the internal politics of the United States that ultimately dictate the course of events. So at some point, maybe on locals, we can perhaps readdress more the issues in the United States itself. Yeah.
Thank you to the locals chat as well, everyone. The locals, good chat over there, great chat over there. We have 2 more super chats, Alexander, real quick. Aung San Suu Kyi, what did she do? From Raphael.
What did she do? She proved to be a very controversial person. I mean, she became prime minister of Myanmar, and Western governments thought that she was much too close to the Myanmar military, and they didn't like her policies with the Rohingya and all that. But I think from the point of view of the Myanmar military, and not just the military, by the way, I know other people in Myanmar think the same also, she was actually still remained much too connected to the West. I think this is a point about Aung San Suu Kyi, which people don't understand actually, which is that the very things that make her attractive to many Westerners, the very fact that she comes across as so Western and so Westernized, makes her suspicious for many people in Myanmar itself. And that's a point which perhaps isn't fully grasped in the West.
She's also very nationalist.
She's
a nation statist. I mean,
she is a nation statist, yes. But, you know, you can be a nation statist and you can still feel a kind of tug towards the West and away from China, but whatever. Anyway, the fact is she's in prison. She's under detention. I don't think that, I mean, it was a straightforward coup. I don't take the charges against her especially seriously. She lost out in a power struggle, basically.
Exactly. Military of 21st Century came in with a super chat that says, Alexander, China has become the world's richest country, according to Bloomberg measurements.
Well, there you go.
And Flying Boar super chat says update on Belarus.
Yeah, integrating with Russia at an ever accelerating rate.
Yeah.
Mr. Lukashenko.
Good job, EU.
I know. He's going to go to Crimea now, he says, and meet with Putin there. So he's going to recognize Crimea as part of Russia, something which he was always resisting doing, by the way.
Exactly.
So
real great strategist at the
great
European
strategy,
Union.
exactly. Indeed, absolutely. So he also says he wants Russian nuclear weapons on Belarus territory, and meanwhile the Belarus economy has been gradually absorbed to the Russian economy. So a brilliant success all round, and the protest movement in Belarus seems to have completely collapsed.
Yeah, and these are the EU people that we let run our lives.
Absolutely.
With mandates and QR codes. These brilliant strategists.
Yes.
Oh boy. Anyway, Alexander, we have gotten all the questions in. We got all the super chats in. Great live stream, great chat. Thank you everybody for joining us and spending time with us. I think we're going to sign off. Cosmic Rain just dropped a 199 super chat. Thank you, Cosmic Rain. Super sticker. Thank you for that. Oh, and Flying Boar dropped a super chat, which is update on the JCPOA. Will Iran and Israel go to war?
It's looking actually slightly more likely. The latest word is that the negotiations are on the brink of collapse. The Iranians are saying that they're not prepared to go back into the JCPOA unless they get firm guarantees. Firstly, that the sanctions will be lifted. That was supposed to be the original deal, and they weren't all lifted. Obama said he would lift the sanctions, and he didn't lift all the sanctions. And secondly, they say that they want firm guarantees that the US won't pull out of the JCPOA. And the administration says it can't bind its successors. The US isn't able to give those sort of guarantees. So the Iranians are saying, well, in that case, we are not going to make any concessions of our own. We want the JCPOA as it originally was. If you're not going to accept that, you're not going to get anything. And so that's pushing the talks to the brink of collapse. Iran now has increased its nuclear enrichment levels to 60%, not far short of what you'd need to have nuclear material to create a bomb. And of course, an Israeli attack becomes more likely. Now, I'm not saying it's going to happen. I think that's something the US wouldn't want. Well, I said that. Maybe there are many people in the US who do want it, but it does seem to me as if we're more likely to be in a war situation than looked likely a few months ago.
Yeah, Vera Rada asks, what will the digital ruble become? Is it supposed to be tied to the Russian gold reserve?
We don't yet know. I mean, it's going to be an extension of the actual ruble. So it will, to the extent that that's connected to the Russian gold reserve, which it is in a way, because the fact that there's so much gold in the Russian central bank reserves means that the Russians can support the ruble through gold sales if they were to choose to. So, I mean, it means that the ruble has a kind of gold backing behind it. Given that the digital ruble will be connected to the ruble, and the ruble is connected, even if fairly tenuously, to gold, it means that you could say that the digital ruble is going to be connected to gold. We don't quite know how this is all going to work and how it's going to function. But one thing it will do, and I suspect, is it's going to make sanctions even more difficult. Because how do you impose financial sanctions in a world where digital currencies can move around? What you can do through digital currencies, of course, is control even more easily the people who use your currency. So it tightens your control over your economy, tightens your control over your financial system, tightens your control over your population. You're able to see what people are spending money on and what they're doing with your money, with their money. But at the same time, it does mean you can bypass sanctions.
Yep. All right. Lovely start to the week, everybody. Thank you very much, Paulie.
Absolutely.
And Lakeva says, build back butter. We'll end it there. Thank you, everybody. Have a great week. Take care.